We're back. Hope everybody had a nice little break. Got a chance to, get a little something, things and stuff, maybe a drink, iced coffee, a cocktail, whatever it is that you prefer at this time of day, wherever it is near you. This is the no judgment zone. I pinned the Spotify playlist mixtape for this trial to the chat. You will see it there. I made some additions based on your suggestions. And I wonder if you have already saved that playlist onto your Spotify, does it automatically update for you? I'm curious about that. Curious. Curious and curiouser. Call me Alice, because I am curious about so many things in this trial. The defense does have a medical examiner testifying, Frank Sheridan from California. And also, Dr. Marie Russell is going to be able to opine about the dog bites or the animal attack injuries to John O'Keefe's right arm. That was decided this morning. So we got that. Let me know, Spotify people, if you got the updates that I just added to the playlist over lunch. Pursuant to your suggestions, I had a request for Runaround by the Blues Traveler because, John O'Keefe wasn't really running around with his phone. He was just waving it around, and that's pretty much why his phone recorded steps that he didn't take, according to this witness. And also, because everyone in this trial seems to be giving us the runaround with their testimony. And I love the Blues Traveler, and that's a great song. I also put in there, let's see, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Does anybody really know what time it is? Does anybody really care by Chicago? We've got another one, Bites the Dust. Did I say Burning Down the House? Good Night, Saigon, Billy Joel, and we will all go down together. That was a bad last note. The Real Slim Shady by Eminem, because pretty much everybody in here has been pretty shady. And then I added You Spin Me Round. Remember? You spin me right round, baby, right round, like a record, baby. Right round, round, round. It's pinned. The playlist is pinned in the chat. Look for my pinned comment and you will find it there. We did get a ruling on the witnesses. Dr. Marie Russell is going to be able to testify about the injuries to John O'Keefe's right arm and that she thinks that they are indeed from an animal attack, to wit, a large breed dog. However, she will not be allowed to testify regarding the other injuries to John O'Keefe and opine whether or not those were caused by a car accident. She also is reserving her ruling. She said that first good hair Dr. Wolf will be allowed to testify. She knows now she wants to know who did what, that the FBI hired accident reconstructionists who did what on the report, because it said we a lot on the report. So he's going to testify about the damage to the car and how that's not consistent with the pedestrian versus motor vehicle accident. And yet, with regard to his name Rentschler, she has not determined yet whether or not she's going to allow him to opine on the injuries and whether the injuries were caused by a motor vehicle accident, although he may be allowed to opine about the velocity and the torque that it would take to fracture perhaps an arm if one was just hit by an arm, hit in the arm by a Lexus with teeth, spun around into a pirouette, smashed into the curb with the back of your head, and then get flung onto the lawn. However, she has let several law enforcement witnesses testify about what they think the injuries were caused by. So methinks she's going to have trouble sustaining that particular objection, especially since she let Yuri and Proctor, one or the other, testify about what they think may have caused John O'Keefe's injuries when they went and viewed his body, sadly, at Good Samaritan Hospital in Brockton. So, I mean, how do you allow police witnesses to testify about causation of injuries, but not allow a biomechanical engineer who actually investigates car accidents for a living and has investigated and reconstructed hundreds, if not thousands, I'm sure. So we'll see. But the defense has plenty of experts lined up for our viewing pleasure. And we're going to see, as we did during the voir dire, the quality of those experts and their as such experience and credentials and how they compare to the witnesses that you've seen presented by the Commonwealth, who create their own software with 600 worldwide users and expect you to believe that their software is better than the gold standard Celebrite that everybody uses across the world in law enforcement, because the floodgates are going to open, I believe. The floodgates, as such, will open on behalf of every defendant who's ever been convicted on Celebrite data. Alec Murdoch, are you listening? Just, open the door and let him out. Thank you so much to Jess for your Venmo. Thank you, Jess. Appreciate you so much. Thanks, Wayne, for buying me 5 matcha lattes. Thank you, Wayne. I like it better than coffee. Wayne says, when I first started following this case, the only one talking about it was Turtle Boy. It's great to see so many people investing time and effort to follow this case to expose the injustice that is being done. Thank you for being involved. Thank you. Take a lot of heat for it, but whatevs. Justin Green, thank you so much. Oh, Justin says he loved Jennifer Esposito in Spin City. Good luck to her. Yeah. If you were not here this morning, Jennifer Esposito is a friend. She was in Spin City. I forgot about that. She was also in Blue Bloods, and she made a movie. The movie is called Fresh Kills. It's about Staten Island and some women in a mob family. And it's an independent film that she backed herself. She mortgaged her house to make this film because nobody in Hollywood would help her. All her famous friends would not donate to get her movie made. So she made this movie called Fresh Kills. It's on limited release in AMC theaters, I think nationwide. Please go see it. Support women in film. She's amazing. And I love Jennifer Esposito, and I want everyone to go see this movie and then come back and report to me. Some people actually went on Fandango and found out where it was playing and already bought tickets. So thank you for that, because it's a story she's been wanting to tell for 20 years. And it has women as all the lead characters, but there's no major stars in it. So nobody wanted to back it. She did it. She made it. She had it made. Katrina, thank you so much. She said, Melanie, had you announced you were going to Dedham, I would have called in sick to meet you. Oh, thank you for buying me a matcha latte, Katrina. But there were many, many reasons that that was a secret until the very, very last minute. And, private security detail was required for that trip. So thank you very much. If you know, you know. But let me tell you, I loved meeting so many of you outside the courthouse last Friday. And it was the outpouring of love and support from everyone outside. They call you protesters, but you're not protesters, you're supporters. And it was really an amazing thing to see and feel. The vibe there is such a good vibe. So many people travel hours and hours to come and support outside the courthouse. None of these people know Karen Reed. None of these people are paid by the defense like some idiots want you to believe. They're actually out there because they believe in justice. And imagine that in this day and age, people believing in justice. I mean, it's crazy, right? Spin Proctors, good one. I like it. I like Space Art Show. Kevin, thank you so much for the Venmo. Says thanks for being here with us every court day. Oh, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Qbert, thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you outside the courthouse. Thanks for the Venmo. In angel numbers 1111. And if you know, you know. And Qbert, so many people wanted to take pictures with me. It was crazy. Nobody's ever wanted to take a picture with me before. I was floored. Hubert, you're amazing. All you guys are amazing. You tailgate out there with your coffee and your donuts and your bagels in the morning and have your laptops out. And apparently I'm on one of them. And I think the glare, maybe our court TV is on the other one. So hello to everyone outside the courthouse today. It's a beautiful day. Kind of hot out there probably, right? But you guys keep on fighting the good fight, keep on doing the good thing. And the fact that you're out there for a stranger because you believe in justice speaks volumes about what's going on. And the people of Massachusetts are outraged because they know that this has been going on for years and years and years and years. And you're mad as hell and you're not going to take it anymore, right, my friends? It is back. And thank you for the nurse's damn trial. And we're back. It's 92 degrees right now. Snow cantation.
All right, so jurors, when we were doing scheduling, and I know scheduling has changed a lot in this case, but my main goal is to get this case to you folks by next week, when we all want the case to you by next week. So originally on the 21st, we were either going to do a whole day and then we couldn't do a whole day, and there was all of this back and forth, and it was a half a day, and it was because I had something scheduled in this courthouse that was not going to be continued through forces that we weren't aware of. It is going to be continued tomorrow. So in light of that, I would like us, and we will be doing a whole day. I understand that for one of you, that you planned on an earlier start to the weekend or a vacation day or something from the afternoon on. But really, all I'm asking of you is to go from, instead of a 1 o'clock stop, to a 4 o'clock stop. And where I guess 14 of you are able to do that, we're going to do that. So tomorrow will be a full day.
So what about the 15th juror? Should they just cancel their vacation plans, Bev? What happened to the Chesna sentencing that was supposed to happen tomorrow? I'm just asking you for 3 more hours. I'm too bad if you had a vacation plan. So are you going to excuse that juror? Is that juror going to be allowed to be excused from jury duty altogether? You just going to get rid of that juror who can't make it? Or are you going to tell that juror that they have to stay until 4, regardless of vacation plans?
Who I'm inconveniencing, but I apologize.
You don't know who you're inconveniencing, but you're going to apologize.
Because when I said emergency, an early start for the weekend was not an emergency.
It was not an emergency.
All right.
Okay.
Could we call the witness back, please?
No, I don't know if she's losing the juror. She's telling the juror can't go on vacation. Her most important goal should be upholding the rights of Karen Reed in a fair trial. Yeah. But don't piss off a juror right now.
Step up and you remain under oath. Thank you. No,
Yeah, so sorry if you planned an early vacation and I told you it was going to be a half day. But, you know, it's not an emergency. So
This case,
we're going till 4
good
tomorrow.
afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So with reference to this case, this investigation, who, if anyone besides you,
If anyone.
created any Cellbrite reports or extractions from any of the phones involved in this case?
Other than the AG's office, it was just myself.
And now you had mentioned that there was some deleted material from the defendant's phone from the afternoon of January 29th, 2022. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what was that was deleted?
There was some search items that were not there in the phone, but found cookies related to
Cookies?
said searches and websites visited.
So as far as search terms or web history, were those the areas that were deleted?
Yes, that's correct.
I have nothing further on.
Oh,
Okay,
Okay, so we brought you back for that, Trooper. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Karen Reed deleted some searches, but didn't he say they could be self-deleted?
Your next witness, Mr. Lally.
And that's why Jen
Yes, Your Honor, I'm
McCabe,
calling to call Dr. Renee Stonebridge to the stand.
Okay.
is this a medical examiner? Didn't he say they could self-delete these searches? So it didn't mean someone actually deleted them. They could self-delete. I love how they use,
I'll give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes. Thank you.
no comments on the witness's looks. We don't tolerate that here. Thank you.
So once you sit, I'm going to tell you that you have to keep your voice up. We want to keep our air conditioning on. So just if you'd speak loudly into the microphone, that would be great. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lally.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Yes, my name is Renee Stonebridge. Last name Stonebridge, Stonebridge.
And what do you do for work?
I am employed through the Chief Medical Examiner's Office at Boston as Director of Cardiac and Neuropathology and Medical Examiner.
Now, if I could ask you just a few questions about sort of your educational and work history background, if that's all right.
Yes.
Starting with your bachelor's degree, where did you go and what, if any, area did you receive a degree in?
So I went to SUNY at Stony Brook in New York. I was a double major in biology and Germanic languages and literature. I graduated with a bachelor's of science degree. After that, I went to the American University of Antigua.
No, she is not she's not the whack job. That proctor called a whack job. She is the neuropathologist. The whack job is Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello, the one that he referred to as a whack job. So she's the neuropathologist. And we'll see what she's got to say for herself. But Long Island strong. Go Stony Brook.
For medical school, and I graduated with honor at the American University of Antigua for medical school, and I graduated with honors, magna cum laude. After that, I did a 4-year combined anatomic and clinical pathology residency program at NYU Winthrop Hospital in Long Island, New York.
Long Island strong. Winthrop Hospital, Mineola, New York. Woo woo.
After that, I did a 1-year forensic pathology fellowship at the Boston office of the Chief Medical Examiner. And after that, I did a 2-year neuropathology fellowship program through Brown University at Rhode Island Hospital.
And doctor, are you board certified?
Yes, I am board certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, forensic pathology, and neuropathology.
And if you could just explain to the jury a little bit about what does board certified mean?
Board certification means that every medical specialty has their own board. So for example, the American Board of Pathology dictates whether or not you can be board certified based on certain criteria. So you have to meet certain criteria, meaning that you have to complete a certain number of surgical specimens, a certain number of autopsies. And then once you meet that criteria, you can take an exam, which if you pass, leads to your board certification.
Now, if I could ask you just a couple, and your board certification is up to date at this point, is that correct?
Yes.
In each of those areas that you just spoke of?
Yes.
Now, if I could ask you some general terms as far as if you could define them for the jury. First of all, what is pathology in a general sense?
Pathology is essentially the study of any sort of disease or abnormal state of the body tissues. So anything that can go wrong in the body and any of the body systems is essentially the study of pathology.
And now starting with anatomic pathology, what is anatomic pathology more specifically?
Anatomic pathology consists of the study of surgical specimens. So for example, if someone goes to the hospital to have a tumor removed, that specimen will go to pathology. The pathologist will look at it, cut it, look at specimens under the microscope, order any ancillary tests if necessary, and then make a diagnosis, which is then conveyed to the clinician. Anatomic pathology also consists of cytopathology, which is looking at individual cells, and then it also consists of autopsy pathology.
And as far as clinical pathology, what does that mean?
Clinical pathology is anything that is lab related in pathology. So if you have to get blood drawn and then the results come back, that is clinical pathology. If there's any sort of blood work that needs to be done, for example, if you're going to have a surgery and they have to cross-match and type you in case of a blood transfusion, that's considered clinical pathology. Also microbiology, so anything infectious. So essentially anything that goes through a lab is clinical pathology.
And what is forensic pathology?
Forensic pathology is the study of autopsies in a medical legal sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be something that is legal. Sometimes it may be just a person who has not seen a doctor in many years, dies at home. There's no physician that is willing to sign a death certificate. So we work on those types of cases, plus anything that is non-natural.
Now, neuropathology, what is that?
Neuropathology is the study of the brain, spinal cord, eyes, muscles, and nerves.
And if you could, just again, in general terms, as far as casework is concerned, related to your work as a director of the neuropathology, can you explain to the jury sort of what it is that you do with respect to neuropathology?
Yes, so my job primarily entails me to be a consultant for the medical examiners. So the medical examiners have a certain set of criteria that they follow in order to determine whether or not a brain needs to be saved for a neuropathologic analysis. So upon following that criteria, if the brain is saved, it gets put into formalin, which essentially fixes the brain so it firms it up, so it makes it easier to analyze. So after the brain has been fixed, I usually let them fix about 2 weeks. Sometimes it could be a little more, a little less, depending on circumstances. I will then look at the brain, take photographs of it from all sides, and then cut the brain, take photographs, document any sort of abnormalities. And then if I feel the need to take sections to look at under the microscope, then I will take those sections. They will be processed through histology. I will look at the slides. Sometimes you may have to add in additional testing, for example, immunohistochemistry, to see if there's anything in particular that you cannot maybe diagnose solely on looking at the histology. And then once that is done, I will issue a report to the medical examiner, and then they use it in terms of determining their cause and manner of death, if necessary.
Now, as far as that formalin process, as far as the solution is concerned, is there a typical time period that the brain would have to be in that solution prior to you examining it or cutting it or any of those other things?
Usually about 2 weeks, give or take maybe a few days here and there, but I usually try to let them fix at least 10 days minimum.
And again, in general terms, with respect to the types of cases that are referred to you, what types of cases are typically referred to you?
So part of the criteria that we use is that any cases for children or babies under the age of 2 years, those always come to me. Also, if there is any cases that have blunt head trauma that may be suspicious or homicidal in nature, those will typically come to me as well. Some of the other cases may be just a difficult neuropathologic entity that a non-neuropath trained medical examiner may not be able to really diagnose. And then sometimes there's cases that are just surprise cases where the medical examiner opens up the head and they see something interesting or abnormal, and they decide to save that case for me to look at further.
Now, with respect to the cases that you do see, at some point did you become involved in analysis or testing of a brain belonging to John O'Keefe?
Yes.
And who was the doctor that was the medical examiner that made that referral in this case?
It was Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello.
And with respect to your analysis here, obviously you looked at the brain. What, if any, other sources of information did you review or did you look at in ultimately formulating your opinion in this case?
So at the time when I was able to cut the brain of Mr. O'Keefe, I had information that was relayed to us from our intake department. So when a case gets called into the medical examiner, it gets taken by the intake department and they're given kind of just a rough summary of the case. I also had the police report, I had the EMS report, I had the medical records from when Mr. O'Keefe was in the hospital. I also had medical records from the primary care physician. I had autopsy photos, and I also had, I believe just refer to my notes here because I had a lot of notes. I also had the inventory and tracking sheets, which are notes created by the medical examiner, and the neuropath request itself.
Now, are you familiar with some terms in relation to injuries that you would observe as far as from a neuropathological perspective, as far as injuries being acute, subacute, or remote?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what those are and what those mean?
So it depends on circumstances. Acute generally is something that happened within a very short time frame. So when I refer to something as being acute, I usually refer to that as something that's occurring from the time of an injury to maybe a day or so afterwards. As I said, it's variable, dependent on circumstances. Subacute is something that has not happened within the last few minutes, few hours, maybe even a day, and maybe something that is now in the process of healing. And then chronic is usually something that has happened a while ago in the past. You may see some sort of evidence of some type of injury in a chronic state. You may also not see any evidence because it may have completely healed by that point.
And so from your analysis in this case, how did you characterize, in your opinion, from everything that you reviewed as far as the injuries you observed in Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
The injuries I observed were acute injuries, meaning that they probably occurred minutes to hours.
Now, if I could turn your attention to your findings as far as when you conducted your analysis and your testing in this particular case, what, if anything, did you find as far as injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
So when I look at the brain, what I do is I look at all surfaces from all sides. And one of the things that I look for is anything grossly obvious, meaning anything I can look at the brain and see that there's something there that shouldn't be there. So one of the first things I noticed was a subarachnoid hemorrhage. And subarachnoid hemorrhage is something that occurs when you have bleeding within the leptomeninges. The leptomeninges are a very thin membrane that encase the brain and the spinal cord, and there should not be blood freely floating within the leptomeninges. So if you have a subarachnoid hemorrhage, most of the time, the causes are either a ruptured aneurysm, which is something I would see upon cutting the brain, or some type of trauma. So that was the first finding.
Can I stop you there just for a second? Of those taking notes and for our court reporter, could you spell the type of hemorrhage and the membrane?
Yes. Subarachnoid is SUBARACHNOID. And leptomeninges, LEPTOMENINGES.
Thank you very much.
You're
She
welcome.
can spell too.
Now, with regard to anything related to the aneurysm that you indicated that you would have seen, what, if anything, did you see during the course of your review or testing or analysis of Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
So aneurysms are typically seen in the cerebral vessels that sit around the base of the brain. So there's something called the circle of Willis, which is the main arterial supply. It sits around the base of the brain, and it's kind of shaped like a circle that has vessels that come off that extend to other areas of the brain. So typically, if there is an aneurysm that is ruptured, it's going to be located somewhere in one of those vessels. So upon observing those vessels, I did not see any evidence of any aneurysm or any sort of natural disease state that might have led to a rupture in one of these vessels. Also, sometimes these vessels, since they do go deep into the brain, you may only see the rupture upon cutting the brain. And I did not see any evidence of any rupture of any of these vessels anywhere in the brain.
Which means, my friends, this was not naturally occurring. Something happened to cause the brain bleed and the multiple skull fractures. It wasn't an aneurysm.
Now, as far as the subarachnoid hemorrhage that you observed, where was that located within the brain, and if you could?
So the subarachnoid hemorrhage was on the frontal poles, which is essentially right here in the front.
All right, I'm stopping the chat because the chat is starting to annoy me now. Stop talking about her appearance. Stop talking about whether or not you like her tattoos, whether or not you like her eyelashes. I don't care about any of that. Whether you think she's dressed appropriately for court. We're not here to talk about that. We're here to listen to her testimony. She's like a literal brain surgeon, okay? Your opinion on tattoos is not going to change her testimony. Enough already. Like, how old are we in the chat? This is a medical examiner, not the medical examiner who wrote the autopsy report. She examined his brain after it was put, I think, in a jar for like 2 weeks or something. And she's going to talk about the brain injuries and what caused them. Now, with regard to your opinions on this woman's tattoos, could there be jurors on the jury who feel the way you do and think that it's not appropriate for court. And of course, people don't leave their common sense at the door when they come to serve on jury duty. Are they not going to believe her testimony because they don't like her tattoos? I don't know, but I'm not going to let my chat behave that way because we're better than that. Okay, enough.
Front of the brain. So the frontal lobes obviously sit in the front, and then the poles are the very frontmost portion of the brain. So it was on the frontal poles. It was also on the left.
I have to rewind that testimony because I had to chastise the chat. I can't persuade jurors, yeah. But can we keep our opinions to ourselves? Talk about her testimony. I don't allow this about any witness.
Arachnoid hemorrhage was
Located. Now, as far as the subarachnoid hemorrhage that you observed, where was that located within the brain? And if you could,
The brain
the
bleed.
subarachnoid hemorrhage was on the frontal poles, which is essentially right here in the front of the brain. So the frontal lobes obviously sit in the front, and then the poles are the very frontmost portion of the brain. So it was on the frontal poles. It was also on the left temporal pole. So the temporal region is right here in the temporal region. And because of the way that the temporal lobe is shaped, it kind of has a little loop right in the front. So it has a pole as well. So it was on the left temporal pole. And then it was also in the left lateral fissure. So you have a frontal pole here. You have the temporal lobe right here. And then the lateral fissure goes kind of in between the temporal and the frontal lobes. So you have the hemorrhage here, and then hemorrhage right there. So it's kind of all concentrated almost in one area. But then there was also hemorrhage of the posterior surface of the right temporal as well. So on this side.
So if somebody punched you in the head repeatedly to your forehead and both sides of the front of your head, this is why it's so important. The front of his head. That's where his brain was bleeding, all in the front. The front, the left side of his temple, and also the right side. Okay? That's where the brain bleed was, my friends. And what does that indicate? We'll find out because she's going to tell us because she's literally a brain doctor, brain surgeon. This is huge. The brain bleed that killed him, the subarachnoid hemorrhage that killed him, was to the entire front of his brain, the left side of his brain, and even on the right side of his brain.
now, doctor, I'm probably going to butcher this horribly, but just as far as the bilateral uncide, are you familiar with that?
Yes. So the unci are the medial portion of the temporal lobes. So the brain is essentially oriented in a way that each hemisphere, the right and left hemisphere, are the same. The unci are the most inner portion of the temporal lobes. So the unci sit just next to the brainstem. So if you have anything that causes herniation of these unci, they start to push inwards onto the brainstem. So say this is the brainstem, here the unci, they start to push in. And because the brain is within the skull is hard, you have no room for any sort of expansion of the brain. If there is herniation, it will start to push in that area because the brainstem turns into the spinal cord and goes out of the skull through the foramen magnum. So you have this hole about this big or so at the base of the skull where the brainstem turns to the spinal cord, then comes out. So that's one of the only areas in which the brain can actually move because it's encased in the hard skull. So if you have herniation, it'll start to push and then push downwards.
Could I ask you to spell unci?
UNCI.
And with reference to this bilateral unci area, what, if any, herniation did you observe?
So when the unci herniate, it can be subtle. Sometimes if it's herniated enough, you may see hemorrhages in the brainstem. And this happens because this tissue is now pushing on the brainstem and it's essentially being compressed. So there was herniation noted, and then there was hemorrhage within the brainstem.
Now, if I could ask you, Doctor, just to be familiar with the term or medical term known as a contusion,
Yes.
and can you explain just in general terms to the jury what you understand that term to mean?
So a contusion is essentially a bruise. It's blood that's coming out from a blood vessel. It's a blood vessel that has been broken in some way, and now there's blood coming out.
Now, you're also familiar with another term, part of that term, known as a punctate contusion?
Yes, so punctate is essentially just a way to describe the size of a contusion. When I say punctate, I mean something that's very, very tiny. It almost just like a dot.
And with respect to punctate contusion, what, if anything, did you observe in Mr. O'Keefe's brain, and where was it located?
So there were punctate contusions in the frontal and temporal cortices. So frontal, once again, is the front portion right here. Temporal is kind of right behind it in this area. And the cortex is the gray matter of the brain. So it's a thin strip that kind of just goes around the brain. And then the white matter is underneath all that. So in traumatic injuries, you can see punctate contusions or even larger contusions in the cortex. It usually indicates that the brain has been pushed against something, which is now causing these little blood vessels to rupture, hence seeing the contusions because the blood is no longer contained in the blood vessels.
Now, Doctor, with regard to the subarachnoid hemorrhage, is there anything that you're able to do as far as measuring that?
It's hard to measure because it's usually pretty vague. It's not usually something that is a well circumscribed, meaning I could say it starts here and ends here. A lot of times with subarachnoid hemorrhage, because it's sitting in this space that it's not supposed to be in, it can spread. So it may be thicker in one area, thinner in another. So you may have some that may appear just as a very faint hemorrhage, and then some that might be very thick, which you can physically measure. So I usually just give an area where it is and say it's here, it's there, because it's almost like measuring something that has blurred edges. You can't really get a completely accurate measurement.
And what, if anything, were you able to observe or measure with regard to the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the area of the left prefrontal lobe?
So it appeared thicker in that area, meaning that as opposed to it looking just like a faint red color that should not be that color, it was actually thick enough that it was obscuring the underlying brain parenchyma.
If I could turn your attention, Doctor, just back for a moment to the punctate contusions that you were testifying about before. As far as your observations of those, was that one or more than one, or how many did you observe?
So there were multiple. There were multiple contusions to the point where it's not something that you can count. I mean, you could count it, but it would probably take a very long time. If it had been something like 1 or 2, 3, 4, maybe a handful, it would probably be something I would say there are 3 here, 4 there, but there were so many that it didn't serve a purpose to count.
And the number of those, what, if any, significance did that have in regard to your analysis, your observations, or your opinion?
So given that there's multiple, it means that there's enough pressure in the brain that there were many surfaces that were pressing on the bony prominences of the skull, which was leading to a lot of blood vessels rupturing, causing these contusions.
Or a lot of blows to the head. He was pulverized. A lot of blows to the head, not just one impact with a car. Now they're changing their theory to make you think that the car, well, no, according to Trooper Paul, the car hit Officer O'Keefe's arm, right? Oops, there it is. So many I didn't even make sense to count. Wow.
Now, I think you've talked a little bit, but just in general terms, if you could describe for the jury, what is a hemorrhage?
So a hemorrhage is essentially blood that's coming out from a vessel. So it's like a bruise. Hemorrhage, bruise, contusion, they're fairly similar. Some people use them interchangeably, but it's essentially blood that's no longer contained in a blood vessel.
When something is termed medically, based on your training experience, as a diffuse hemorrhage, what does that mean?
So diffuse means it's over a very large area. It's not something that's just a tiny little area. You could say, okay, I'm looking at this person's, let's say, liver, and there's a 2 by 2 centimeter hemorrhage sitting right there in the right lobe of the liver. Diffuse would mean there's hemorrhage throughout nearly the entirety of the liver.
Now, with regard to, you made a note as far as there being a diffuse hemorrhage within the pons, P-O-N-S, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury sort of what that means and where is that located within the brain?
So the pons is part of the brainstem. So the brainstem starts right in the middle of the brain, and you have the midbrain, the pons, the medulla, and then it turns into the spinal cord. So the pons is kind of in the middle of the brainstem. And when you have hemorrhage in the pons, in this circumstance, it was because there was the herniation of those oci, which began moving closer and closer towards the pons, pressing on it, causing hemorrhage, because now the tissue is compressed. The blood is not going to be able to flow in and out freely, therefore hemorrhage.
Now, with regard to the totality of what you reviewed in this case in regard to Mr. O'Keefe, will you be able to form any opinions to a reasonable degree of medical certainty in regard to the injuries that you observed to Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
I was able to determine that these are acute traumatic injuries. I know that based on what I observed and in combination with the autopsy findings, that this is due to some type of trauma.
Some type of trauma. She won't commit to a car accident.
If I could ask, as far as you have certain findings as far as an intraventricular hemorrhage and occipital horns of the lateral ventricles, correct?
Yes.
If you could please explain to the jury what exactly does that mean?
Brain
Yes.
bleed.
So the ventricles are almost like a tunnel system of the brain in which the cerebrospinal fluid flows through. So the cerebrospinal fluid serves as a fluid that nourishes the brain. It provides a flow of nutrients, oxygen, things like that. And it starts in the frontal portion of the brain, and then it goes backwards towards the occipital, which is the back. And it also flows downward through the brainstem and then into the spinal cord as well. So the occipital horns of the lateral ventricles are in the back of the head, and having hemorrhage in those areas, in any area of the ventricular system, is usually indicative of some type of trauma. So there should not be blood freely flowing within the ventricular system.
Now, Dr. Stonebridge, with regard to your findings, you mentioned that your findings were that the injuries were acute and that the injuries were the result of trauma, correct?
Yes.
What, if anything, can you say or can you opine as to the mechanism for those acute traumatic injuries?
It was something that required some type of force, given that there were skull fractures. I can't say what type of force or how much force, but it was definitely something that caused some type of force, which led to the skull fractures and then the subsequent brain findings.
Yeah, force like blows to the head.
And the brain findings in particular that you made, were those consistent with the fall?
They can be, yes.
With a
Can they also
fall.
be consistent with being struck by a vehicle and then going to the ground?
Yes, they can be.
Can they be consistent with a fight?
Thank you, doctor. I have no further questions.
You're
Excellent.
welcome.
Cross-examination?
Oh, yeah. Who's doing this?
No questions, thank you.
No questions.
Doctor, thank you very much. You are all set.
Thank you.
Can they be consistent with a fight?
Mindful to step down. Thank you.
Punches to the head, blows to the head?
Yes, Your Honor, the Commonwealth called Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello to the stand.
This is the one. This is the one.
And Your Honor, as she's coming in, may we approach briefly?
Sure.
This is the one who Proctor called a, what did he call her again? not a nutbag, whack job. Whack job. She's the one who has undetermined as the cause of death on the death certificate, but she does say in her autopsy report that these injuries are not consistent with a fight. And she was perhaps pressured to say that by Proctor Buchanan because they had 2 conference calls with her to get her to try and change her manner of death from undetermined to homicide. There are 5 manners of death for a death certificate: homicide, suicide, accidental, natural, or undetermined. This death certificate says undetermined, and it has never been amended.
SS for identification. Madam Court Reporter, what was previously marked SS for identification is now the next exhibit in evidence. Thank you. All right, so are you looking for my instruction now, Mr. Lally?
Yes, please, Your Honor.
All right, so jurors, I gave you a similar instruction before about photographs. So the Commonwealth intends to introduce into evidence through the next witness certain photographs showing Mr. O'Keefe post-mortem. You'll have those photographs with you in connection with this case. I understand that some of them will be shown up on the screen, and that's why I want to sort of give you a
Trigger
warning that
warning?
will happen. When they come to you as exhibits, they'll be placed in an envelope. You can, look at them briefly. They'll be covered, is what I'm saying to you. So the photographs are not pleasant. They can be described as graphic. And I instruct you that your verdict must not in any way be influenced by the fact that these photographs will be unpleasant, perhaps sad and graphic. The defendant's entitled to a verdict based solely on the evidence and not one based on pity or sympathy for Mr. O'Keefe, which might be occasioned by the photographs. So please consider those photographs only as they draw your attention to a clinical, medical status or to the nature of Mr. O'Keefe's injury or to the nature of the incident itself. Okay. All right. Now your next witness, please, Mr. Lally.
Yes.
Swear that the testimony you shall give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending shall be.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
My name is Irini Scordi-Bello. My last name is spelled Scordi-Bello.
And how are you employed, ma'am?
I am employed as a medical examiner.
And for whom are you employed?
I am employed by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
And how long has it been that you've been medical examiner for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Massachusetts?
I have been with OCME in Massachusetts since December of 2016.
Now, ma'am, if I could take you back and just ask you a few questions regarding your educational background, work history a little bit prior to working at the OCME in Massachusetts. If I could start with your undergraduate work, as far as where did you go and what, if anything, did you receive a degree?
I completed a bachelor's degree in microbiology at the University of California.
And after receiving that degree, where did you go from?
I went on to the University of Miami, where I completed my doctorate degree in immunology. And following that, I moved up to New York City, where I went to medical school. I completed 4 years of medical school at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine.
It's a good one.
And following medical school, I completed 3 years of pathology residency at the Mount Sinai Hospital.
And then following.
Everybody hit the like button before we continue because it doesn't carry over from the morning. This is a new stream. We got 4,100 watching and there's only like Almost 1,000 likes. That's only 25%. So let's get more, or I'll make you listen to Lally drone all day.
Your residency at Mount Sinai, where did you go from there?
And from there, I went downtown in New York City and I completed a 1-year fellowship in forensic pathology at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for the City of New York.
And following that 1-year fellowship there, where did you go from there?
I worked in New York City until 2016 when I moved here to Massachusetts.
Now, are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
What are you board certified in?
I'm board certified in anatomic pathology and forensic pathology.
And if you could explain to the jury just briefly, what does it mean to be board certified and sort of what is entailed in that process?
Board certification is actually a voluntary process that a physician decides to go through. It involves completing an accredited program in the specialty of choice. In my case, it was pathology and forensic pathology, and then completing a number of requirements as well as taking and successfully passing exams, and then being able to say that you're board certified.
And is that certification at this time, is that up to date?
Yes.
Now, with regard to the time that you've been working as a forensic pathologist, are there any organizations that you belong to in relation to your work in that field?
Yes, I am a member of the National Association of Medical Examiners.
And that's an acronym as far as name.
Name.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, with respect to that time frame as well, what, if any, experience do you have in regard to teaching the areas related to your field?
I have always been interested in teaching. I started teaching as a pathology resident, teaching other residents and medical students. And during my time in New York City, I enjoyed teaching medical students and residents. We had a very active education program in New York City. So I've always been involved with teaching both pathology and forensic pathology.
Now, to those terms themselves, if I could ask you briefly just to describe to the jury as far as pathology in general sense, what is pathology?
Pathology is a specialty of medicine, and pathology looks at disease processes and as well as trauma and the effect they have on the human body.
And what is forensic pathology?
Forensic pathology looks at disease processes and injuries in the human body and tries to determine the cause of death in deceased individuals.
And as far as anatomic pathology, what exactly is that?
Anatomic pathology, as opposed to clinical pathology, is has to do with any organ that is in the body, versus clinical pathology that deals with fluids and blood analysis and things like that. So anatomic pathology, a lot of anatomic pathologists are surgical pathologists. That's another term that you will hear. These are pathologists in the hospital that look at tissues under the microscope, and they come to a diagnosis, whether something is benign or malignant. And forensic pathology takes anatomic pathology to another step, to another level, by looking at the whole body and trying to determine the cause of death instead of organ specific. Instead of just looking at one organ, forensic pathology looks at the whole body.
Now, you're also familiar through your work and training experience in regard to forensic pathology with a term called autopsy.
Yes.
And is that something that typically you would do in the case of sort of your investigation and your analysis in regard to pathological analysis when it came to a body or a patient that comes in?
Yes, an autopsy is a procedure that we do to determine the cause and manner of death.
And so, doctor, with respect to an autopsy, may be a term that's pretty well understood, but if you could explain in general terms as far as when a body or a patient comes in to the OCME, as far as what is an autopsy, what is involved in it, and sort of what does that consist of?
Yes. When case, a death is first reported to the medical examiner's office. We make a determination as to whether that death falls under our jurisdiction. Cases that fall under the jurisdiction of the medical examiner include all violent deaths, all deaths that are due to not natural causes, all accidents, intoxications, deaths of babies and children, and deaths in individuals that were not under the care of a physician when the death occurred. So once a case is accepted and it falls under our jurisdiction, it is given a numerical number. And then the body is transported from either the location of the death or the hospital to our facility. Our facilities. We have 3 facilities in the state of Massachusetts. Once the body comes to our facility, then there are a number of steps that are taken. The body is processed. What that means is that there pictures are taken, a weight is taken, a height is taken. Everything is input into our computer system, and then a determination is made as to whether an autopsy is required in order for us to determine the cause and manner of death. If the answer is yes, then we proceed with the autopsy.
Now, as far as an autopsy is concerned, there are 2 sort of primary components of that as far as an external examination and an internal examination. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you describe to the jury, again, in general terms, sort of what the process is in reference to both external and internal?
Yes. So the autopsy or the postmortem examination has 2 main parts. The first one is the external exam, and it is basically what it sounds like. We do a very thorough exam of the outside of the body. We document physical characteristics, eye color, hair color. We document any scars or tattoos that may be on the body. We take pictures, we make notes, we look for any signs of disease and any signs of injury. All that is, as I mentioned, documented. And once we're, during the external examination, sometimes we will take evidence. We will collect hair and nails from the body if we think that is necessary or warranted. And once the external examination is done, then we proceed to the internal examination. That involves making surgical type cuts on the body, what's known as the Y incision that goes from shoulder to shoulder and down the middle of the body, and the organs of the neck, the chest, the abdomen are examined thoroughly, again, looking for and documenting signs of disease or signs of injury. We do the same thing with the head. The head is open, the brain is removed, and we document any disease or injury.
Now, turning your attention to January 31st, 2022, did you have occasion to perform an autopsy in regard to a patient or a body of John O'Keefe?
I did.
And do you recall which of, you mentioned there were 3 different offices of the chief medical examiner within the state of Massachusetts, correct?
Yes, it was in the Cape Cod office.
Is that the office that you typically work out of?
No, that's not the office I typically work out of. My permanent position is in the Westfield office in Western Massachusetts. I was covering the office that day because we were short-staffed.
Why did they take him to
And
Cape Cod?
In the reference to the autopsy that you performed with regard to Mr. O'Keefe, was that in conformity with what you were speaking about just before, generally as far as how you conduct autopsies?
Yes.
Now, during the course of the autopsy that you performed in reference to Mr. O'Keefe, during the course of the external examination, what, if anything, did you note in reference to that external examination of Mr. O'Keefe?
First, I noted that there was evidence of medical intervention. Mr. O'Keefe's body was transported to our facility from the hospital, and he had evidence of attempted resuscitation. After I documented that, I proceeded to document some injuries that I saw on Mr. O'Keefe's body.
And before we turn to that, if I could just ask you a couple more general questions. You've made some mention earlier in your testimony as far as the cause and manner of death in general. That's two things that you're trying to determine during any sort of forensic pathological examination, correct?
Yes.
And what I'm going to ask you first is just in reference to manner of death. Can you describe for the jury sort of what are the different types of manner in death, and how are they sort of classified from a perspective from your office?
He's trying to get out ahead of it. He's trying to get out ahead of it because it's undetermined.
Okay. Yes. So the manner of death are the circumstances that led to the cause of death. The cause of death being the disease or the injury that initiated the sequence that led to the fatal event. So the manner of death is circumstance dependent. There are 5 general manners of death, or 5 umbrellas. The first one is natural. When we determine manner of death to be natural, it means that the death was caused exclusively by natural disease. That would be heart disease, liver disease, cancer, aging, Alzheimer's, dementia, etc. The second manner of death is accident. That means that the cause of death was due to an injury or due to an intoxication, either a physical injury or a chemical injury. But the circumstances show little or no evidence that intoxication or that injury was intentional. So most motor vehicle accidents, most drug overdoses, most elderly falls are classified as accidents.
So if this was a motor vehicle accident, it would be accident or homicide, not undetermined, right? Okay.
Fatal outcome was not intentional. Homicide is a manner of death when there is injury inflicted by another person, but there is evidence that there was intent to cause fear, harm, or death to the other individual. And suicide is due to either an injury or an intoxication. And again, the circumstances and the evidence suggest or point strongly to the fact that that was a self-inflicted, intentional act on behalf of the person with the intent to cause harm to themselves or cause death to themselves. So most hangings, intentional overdoses by prescription medications are classified as suicides. And then we have, one more manner that we call undetermined. Some jurisdictions, they call it could not be determined. That means that evidence pointing towards one set of circumstances or one manner is no more compelling than evidence pointing towards another manner of death. So if we don't have enough information to know whether something, or to be able to determine the circumstances, then we are left with an undetermined manner of death.
Now, am I correct in stating that the cause?
Yeah, he prepped her on this. Probably the only thing he prepped her on. Undetermined, she's saying, is where one manner of death is no more compelling than another. So whereas accidental could mean motor vehicle accident and homicide means intent to kill someone, she's saying undetermined means that, well, it could have been homicide, could have been accidental. I couldn't decide. Neither one of them was more compelling, so I picked undetermined. We'll see what happens on cross of this.
cause of death is something that's more like a medical determination, is that correct?
Yes, the cause,
So watch the leading questions, Mr. Elliott. Sustained.
Oh, I guess Liza's doing the cross.
How would you characterize the determination that you make in regard to a cause of death?
the cause of death is based on my findings at the time of autopsy, along with any medical information that I may have on that deceased individual.
Now, as far as the manner of death, how are you making that determination?
The manner of death, as I mentioned, is circumstance dependent. I make that determination based on investigative information that is provided to me by law enforcement, by the people who did the investigation.
Ah,
And what, if any, legal determination are you making as far as when you classify something as either of those 5 categories in a manner of death?
I am not making a legal determination. I'm making a medical determination.
And so as far as the medical determination as manner of death, specifically when I'm talking about something that could be ruled or listed as manner of death as accident, is that, what if any determination are you making as far as that is concerned?
I'm making the determination that the information that I have either shows no evidence or very little evidence that the injury that led to the cause of death was intentional. So I don't have any information to suggest that that was an intentional act.
And am I correct in saying that routinely people charged with, say, motor vehicle homicides, it gets classified as a manner of death as accident, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
yeah.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Did you hear what he said? He said, so most people who are charged with motor vehicle homicides, the manner of death is accidental, right? Even though it was a homicide. Let's hear that question again. Routinely, sort of, kind of, you can't sort of, kind of a medical expert. They're not sort of, kind of people. They're fact-based, medicine-based. They're going to answer your question if you say sort of, kind of.
To suggest that that was an intentional act.
And am I correct in saying that routinely people charged with, say, motor vehicle homicides, it gets classified as a manner of death as accident, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Routinely, people charged with motor vehicle homicides have their death certificate say accident, right?
May I approach, Your Honor?
Right
The
there.
review of the couple finish.
Oh, he's approaching her. I thought he was doing a sidebar.
Doctor, I'm showing you the documents as to the review of the couple finish.
Yes,
And do you recognize that document, doctor?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
This is a copy of the death certificate for Mr. John O'Keefe.
That's signed by yourself, is that correct?
Correct.
And as far as the listing related to cause of death, what did you list as cause of death on Mr. O'Keefe with regard to his death certificate?
Cause of death was blunt impact injuries of head and hypothermia.
And with reference to manner of death, what, if anything, did you list on Mr. O'Keefe's death certificate in relation to manner of death?
I listed could not be determined.
And as far as that listing for could not be determined, if you could explain to the jury why it was that you have that listed as a manner of death with relation to Mr. O'Keefe.
Again, the cause of death is something that I can determine by the autopsy. I did the autopsy on Mr. O'Keefe and determined that he had injuries to his head as well as signs of hypothermia. So the combination of those two was the cause of death. The manner of death has to do with the circumstances under which Mr. O'Keefe sustained those injuries. And I did not have enough information to be able to determine whether those injuries were accidental or not.
Right. Because the information that law enforcement gave you, as Suzanne Honeyman says, could not be determined because the injuries and the information didn't line up. She determined through autopsy that his cause of death was blunt impact injuries to the head and hypothermia. That's what killed him, in her opinion.
And so my manner of death was undetermined or could not be determined.
And just from the spectrum that you had just talked about, sort of the 5 different manners of death, fair to say that you did not determine that this was either suicides or natural causes, correct?
Correct.
And so as far as your determination of manner of death being could not be determined, which of the two were you sort of in between?
The 2 manners of death that remain are accident and homicide.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yeah.
So she couldn't decide if it was an accident or if it was a homicide, so she just picked undetermined.
I want to seek to introduce in a minute
Okay.
the next exhibit.
No objection.
What law enforcement told her did not line up with what she saw. That's what I'm reading between the lines here, right? But most motor vehicle homicides are ruled accidents, but not here,
Now,
right,
Dr.
Jimmy?
Scordi-Bello, you had made reference as far as cause of death being a blunt force injury. Is that correct?
Correct.
At least one of the contributing causes. If you could explain to the jury sort of what you understand that to mean as far as what is a blunt force injury.
Blunt force injuries are caused by any blunt object. That is a very big category of objects.
Not the ground, though, right, doctor? If he hit his head on the ground or on the curb, wouldn't that be considered a fall? She just testified that she autopsies a lot of decedents who fall, elderly falls, she said. Look at her tongue sticking out. Freeze frame on point today. Blunt force trauma does not include hitting the ground. Wouldn't that be a fall, doctor? Taking it back a second.
Vary by
Blunt force injury.
blunt
There you go.
force injuries are caused by any blunt object. That is a very big category of objects. A microphone could be a blunt object. This bottle, if heavy enough, could be a blunt object. The ground can be a blunt object. So
The
anything that
ground is
doesn't
not a
have a
blunt
sharp
object. Wrong.
edge or a razor edge, not a knife, not a
I disagree.
not a scalpel, is a blunt object. Blunt impact injuries are categorized into contusions, which are bruises, abrasions, which are scratches, fractures, which are a break in the bone, and lacerations, which are tears in the skin. So when we say blunt impact injuries, we could be referring to any of those or a combination of those 4 types. And all those are the result of impact of the body with a blunt object.
Now, we'll get more into specifics in a moment, just in general terms as far as from your external examination of Mr. O'Keefe's body, whereabouts sort of geographically on the body did you observe these blunt force injuries?
The majority of the blunt force injuries were to the face and the head, as well as to the upper extremities, the arms.
Mm-hmm. Hold on. Did she say the majority of the injuries? How about all of the injuries? Remember that big egg that was over his right eye that Timothy Nuttall told us about? It was like a big egg. The majority were to the face and the arm. Okay, did he really say whereabouts sort of geographically? Like geographically on his body? Wow, what a bad question. Hold on.
Just in general terms as far as from your external examination of Mr. O'Keefe's body, whereabouts sort of geographically on the body did you observe these blunt force injuries?
Geographically on the body? How about like anatomically? Geographically on the body? Is he a map?
The majority of the blunt force injuries were to the face and the head, as well as to the upper extremities, the arms.
Arms, plural, or
Now,
just arm?
starting with Mr. O'Keefe's head, what was it specifically, or where was it that you observed blunt force injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's head?
Okay. I observed a number of different injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's head, starting with his eyes. He had hemorrhage or bleeding on the upper eyelids of both eyes, as well as swelling of the eyes. He had a small laceration, a small tear in the skin on the right eyelid, again associated with the bleeding. He had some abrasions. Abrasions are superficial scratches on the skin on the left side of his nose, I believe. And when I looked at the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head, he had a laceration. It's a tear in the skin that was surrounded, or it was associated with an abrasion, a scrape.
Scrape on the back of his head? Wait a minute.
Now, in terms of the
He
extremities.
scraped the back of his head? Hold on.
Now, in terms.
Or it was associated with his head. He had a laceration. It's a tear in the skin that was surrounded, or it was associated with an abrasion, a scrape.
Okay.
Now, in terms of the extremities, and I'll start with upper extremities as far as his arms, what, if anything, did you observe in regard to blunt impact injuries to his arms?
Arms?
He had, on the right upper extremity, he had a number of somewhat linear, somewhat patterned abrasions, scrapes, varying sizes, ranging from small 2 to 3 millimeters to, I believe, 5 or 6 centimeters, both on the upper arm and part of his forearm. He had some contusions or some bruising on the dorsal aspect of the right hand that I measured and documented. He had he had a very small abrasion, I believe, on the lower extremities near the right knee, but I would have to look at my
Yeah, that's
notes
important.
to be absolutely sure.
You can go ahead and look at your notes anytime you need to, doctor.
I
Okay?
can go into my notes?
Yes.
Okay.
She said arms, but she only indicated the right arm abrasions, which she calls scrapes, and bruising on the right hand.
Is right, noted it. So as far as his extremities, I noted a 3 centimeter superficial abrasion to his right medial upper arm. That would be the medial aspect, would be the inner aspect of the right arm.
There's your bottom teeth, everyone who said there's no abrasions on or scrapes or lacerations on the inner arm. Okay, I'll play that again. The inner upper arm.
To his, I noted a 3 centimeter superficial abrasion to his right medial upper arm. That would be the medial aspect, would be the inner aspect of the right arm. I noted the abrasions on his posterior right arm and forearm. Those ranged from 3 millimeters to up to 7 centimeters. I noted 2 red contusions on the dorsal aspect of the right hand. Again, that's the back of the hand. A faint abrasion, a faint scratch on the dorsal aspect of the left hand, and a small 0.5 centimeter abrasion on his right lateral knee, on the side of his knee, on the right side.
Now, I think you've defined it fairly well so far, but I'm just going to ask you, just for delineation purposes, if you could explain to the jury sort of what is the difference between an abrasion versus a contusion versus a laceration.
Okay. An abrasion is a scrape. It's a scrape of the superficial layers of the skin. A contusion is a bruise. So if I hit myself hard enough on my nightstand, and I break blood vessels in under the skin, then I can end up with a bruise or a contusion. A laceration is a tear, not necessarily a cut. There's a distinction between a cut and a tear. A tear in the skin is due to a blunt object, maybe the corner of the nightstand that's sharp enough to tear my skin, but not so sharp as a blade that would actually cut the skin smoothly. So we differentiate between lacerations and cuts because cuts are due to sharp objects, lacerations are due to blunt objects. And fractures are basically a break in the bone, again, due to blunt trauma.
Are you familiar with what is termed as an incised wound?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Incised, I-N-C-I.
Incised, yes.
If you could explain the difference between sort of the mechanism and sort of what you observe between a laceration and an incised wound.
Yes. So an incised wound is what I previously called a cut. So the analogy I like to give is if you have a loaf of bread and you're trying to cut the bread. If you take a very good bread knife, sharp knife, you will be able to smoothly cut the bread. If you take a hammer, which is a blunt object, and you try to cut the bread, you're going to shred it up. So an incised wound is a smooth cut. Knives, razors will cause incised wounds on the skin. A blunt object will cause a laceration. It will break the skin, and the edges will not be uniform, and there might even be some bruising around it.
Now, with respect to the injuries that you talked about as far as the abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, how was that located in reference to sort of the circumference of the arm? And what I'm asking there is, was it on top, on the bottom, or everywhere?
I describe them as being on the posterior right arm and forearm. So when we examine a body, we examine the body in what's known as the anatomic position, which is the body on the table with the palms upwards. And so the posterior right arm and forearm would be what would be facing the table as the body is laying on the table, the backside of the arm and the forearm.
So the opposite of posterior would be what?
Would be anterior, and it would be this area right here that points up.
And as far
Or
as
forward.
the anterior of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, what, if anything, did you observe as far as injuries there?
I noted in my diagrams and my charts that they were mostly on the posterior right arm and forearm.
Mostly. But you said earlier that there was at least one on the inside of the arm. But did you photograph the inside of the arm? I'd like to know.
Now, Dr. Scordi-Bello, if I could turn your attention to the internal examination as far as the injuries that you observed there, what, if anything, did you observe during the course of your internal examination of Mr. O'Keefe?
Okay, the internal examination, I will start with the head. Once the skull was open and the head was examined, I noted that there were skull fractures in Mr. O'Keefe's skull, both in the back and the front aspect of his skull. I noted that there was recent subdural hemorrhage. That is blood that is under the dura, and the dura is a very tough protective cover that sits over the brain. I noted that there was subarachnoid hemorrhage. That's hemorrhage that is directly on top of the brain under the leptomeninges, which is a very thin membrane that covers the brain. And at that point, I removed the brain, and I, instead of examining it right then and there, I saved it in a special solution, and I sent it to our office in Boston for our neuropathologist to fully examine.
Why didn't they do the autopsy in Boston? Why did they go to Cape Cod? I mean, I just did the Google Maps and it's like an hour and a half from Brockton to Cape Cod, depending on which part of the Cape, I guess, 62 miles. Why wouldn't they take his body to Boston? I don't know. I'm just asking. Was there a reason?
And is it your understanding that a neuropathologist ultimately conducted a fuller examination of Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
Yes,
And who was that neuropathologist within your office?
Dr. Stonebridge.
Now, with reference to the head, as far as the skull, you indicated that there were fractures as in plural, correct?
Yes.
And with reference to the fractures, what, if any, relationship did you know between the fractures that you observed and the laceration to the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head that you spoke about in your external examination?
So the laceration on the scalp that I observed was overlying the area of the skull that appeared to be fractured, or at least appeared that the fractures were originating from that point of impact and extending into the rest of the skull.
Now, one of anything as far as your observations of the skull on that point in the, I'm sorry, which part of the skull was the originating fracture?
This would be on the back of the skull, slightly right of midline.
Is that the medical term that that's referred to as?
I'm sorry?
Is there a medical term that that's referred to as far as the right rear sort of?
It's the right occipital.
And
So she's
what, if
saying that
anything,
was
led
the
you
originating fracture? That's the initial fracture was to the back of the head?
to that opinion that that was sort of the originating source of the multiple fractures in the skull that you observed?
Again, observing or looking at the skull fractures and their pattern, there appeared to be a central point with fractures radiating or originating from that central point and going into other parts of the skull.
Now, in reference to that laceration in the area of the originating fracture in the back of the skull, what, if anything, did you determine in regard to impact in regard to that area of the head?
Well, the laceration along with, so the tear in the skin along with the scrape, because they were adjacent, are both evidence of blunt impact. So I knew at that point that Mr. O'Keefe's head had come in contact with a blunt object.
Would that be sort of the point of impact between the blunt object and Mr. O'Keefe's head?
Right.
Now, with reference to the fractures that you would observed, how extensive were the fractures that you observed, the multiple ones?
Well, there were multiple fractures. So by definition, multiple fractures in multiple chambers or parts of the skull. So I would say they were extensive.
Extensive. Think about that. Extensive. Low speed motor vehicle accident. Well, 24.2 miles an hour. Is that going to cause multiple skull fractures? Where did all the blood go? I don't know if his nose was fractured.
Yes.
Take all the moments, Lally.
Conducting this internal. Now, when you're conducting this internal examination, is there sort of a division of the body that you're doing as far as what you're examining and in what order and sort of things that you're looking at from the internal examination?
Well, we examine everything, and usually we start in the external examination, we start from the head and work our way down. During the internal examination, we're doing two things at the same time sometimes. And so I start with the chest, move to the abdomen, and then the pelvis, while at the same time, we're working on the head.
All right, I'm going to pause you there for a minute. We're going to take a short recess and we'll be back.
We just came back from lunch. Is this the afternoon break? Yeah, I thought the car hit his arm only too. Free Billy Tibbetts. Free my boy Billy Tibbetts. If you know, you know. Free Billy Tibbetts. Take the trigger warning down. OnlyFans all the time here on Core TV. At least give them credit for the stream. I like how they move their logo to the upper right so I can cover it with my own. And also, they all of a sudden started putting the witness's name down on the bottom. Interferes with my ticker, but whatevs, no big whoop. I'm not gonna cry about it. I'm not gonna cry about it. How do I take the banner down now? Hang on. The ticker. They call it a ticker here on StreamYard, my friends. It's a ticker. Liliana, thank you for becoming a new member. Narelle Jewel, thanks for the super chat from Down Under. Thank you, Melanie. Only watch your channel for this case. It's so respectable. Much love from Down Under. Free Karen Reed, thank you. Thank you, Narelle. An eclectic mind. Is that K a subtle message? Yes, the previous witness, the neuropathologist, did have a K tattoo on her right shoulder, I believe, right? Chloe Albert's Revenge, thanks for the super chat. If you've never had a doctor that looks similar to her, maybe you should explore outside your bubble. It's not even uncommon. It's 2024. I think you were referring to the previous doc, right? Melanie, do you think we'll get to cross today? Well, let's see. Thanks for getting up for your super chat. It is 3:19. Well, she doesn't like to go too much past 4, but we're having a full day of court tomorrow, everybody. So yay! For the poor juror who had, vacation plans. Too bad, so sad for that juror, I guess. But tomorrow there she's going to go till 4. I don't know if they'll get to cross today. Maybe Lally has. Can he drag it out for another hour with this witness? Maybe. Maybe. Joyce Burke became a member. Welcome, welcome. Chloe Albert's Revenge. Thanks. She was here in New York City for September 11th aftermath. She had a hand in examining those victims or pieces. Yeah. I'm sure she knows what she's talking about. Yeah, that's a rough, maybe that's why she moved to Mass. PTSD. I can't even imagine working. So many of my friends were first responders who Duty Ron, Phil, Ed, all those guys. Prayers up. Ryan Blackhawk, thank you. Trying to send super chat from another browser. I don't know what the issue is. YouTube's having a lot of issues lately, you guys. I think this trial is literally breaking YouTube. I have a feeling it's not just me and you having problem. It's everybody. Thanks, Dan, for your super sticker. Nina, thanks for coming in again. Respectfully, I don't like the AJ Bang Bang song. Let's keep it classy, right? Don't curse, right? I don't think AJ is like that. He's classy. No need to promote. But I like the Nancy Sinatra version. Well, you know what? Those are all words that he said during the trial. He said it during the trial because he was quoting Proctor or Colin Albert or whoever it was that he was talking to. And that was actual in-court questioning using their own words. I think it was Colin Albert's words in his videos, and he was repeating it back to him. So thanks, Nina, for keeping it classy, as always. True Crime with Stephanie Michelle, thank you. Says this is where Carrie Roberts' testimony, Karen Reed's taillight, having sharp corner. Yeah. Yeah, remember Carrie Roberts all of a sudden testified that there's a little piece missing from Karen's taillight, and there was a piece of metal sticking out, and she thought to herself, wow, I sure hope nobody gets their sleeve caught on that, because it would tear their clothing. Thanks, AC, for becoming a member. Christine Fortunato, thanks for being a member for 5 months. Can I interview you about the Karen Reed trial? Interview me where? Where do you want to interview me? I barely have time to tend to my regularly scheduled programming with all of my children and everything else, but reach out to me. I don't know what publication you work for. Let's see, my friends. Let's see. How long do you think this break's going to be? Thank you so very much, Melissa. Thank you, Melissa. What happens if you find a jury summons and a huge pile of junk mail and the appearance date was a month ago asking for a friend in Colorado? Contact the court. Or if you're even close enough to court, go down there with your jury summons and just say, listen, hey, this was in my mail. Like, I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. can you reschedule me? It's not like they're going to send the sheriff out to, bring you in or anything. They're not going to come and get you, but it is important not to ignore the summons. But yeah, if it came in a huge pile of junk mail, absolutely. Go down there. They'll straighten it out for you. Dawn, thank you for your Venmo, says, thanks for the best coverage and commentary. Free Karen Read. They're back. Somebody's opening something near the mic.
Thank you, receiving both back to
All right, Mr. Lally.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bish.
Now, doctor, as far as the internal examination was concerned with regard to Mr. O'Keefe, starting with his stomach, what, if anything, did you observe of any significance in that area?
I observed that there were some small hemorrhages, small areas of bleeding in Mr. O'Keefe's stomach.
And are those described in medical literature as a specific type of spot?
They have a name. They're called Wisniewski spots.
Wisniewski spots.
WISCHNEWSKI. And they have been associated with cases of hypothermia.
Oh.
And how so? How have they been associated with cases of hypothermia?
They have been seen in cases of hypothermia. It's one of the findings that supports the diagnosis of hypothermia. They are not always there, and their presence doesn't definitively diagnose hypothermia, but they are one of the findings that, if present, suggest the diagnosis of hypothermia.
And based on your training and experience, based on other types of literature that you've reviewed in regard to hypothermia, what is
Literature?
as far as these Wisniewski spots?
Did you have to look it up?
Thank you very much for saying that until after you had said it. With regard to that, what if anything does it say as far as the causality of that, or how that occurs or is related to hypothermia?
We don't really know the pathophysiology of these spots. There have been various hypotheses. People have suggested that they are a response to stress. Some people have suggested that hypothermia increases secretion of acid in the stomach, and that leads to these spots, but their exact pathophysiology is still under investigation.
Now, in addition to these areas of small hemorrhage in Mr. O'Keefe's stomach, what, if anything, did you observe in the pancreas?
In the pancreas, I again observed some more diffuse hemorrhage of the pancreas and the tissues around it.
And same question with regard to the spots and the hemorrhages you observed in the stomach. What, if any, relationship do the hemorrhages or the bleeding in the pancreas have in relation to hypothermia?
Again, it's one of the findings that, if present, should alert the medical examiner to consider the possibility of hypothermia.
And as far as the observations that you made, as far as the hemorrhages in the stomach area of Mr. O'Keefe and the hemorrhages in the pancreatic area of Mr. O'Keefe, the sort of juxtaposition of those, what, if any, significance did that have in regard to your hypothermic diagnosis?
When the case was called into our office and when we accepted the case, it was reported to us that this was an individual that was found in the snow, covered with snow, and it appeared that he may have been there for a period of time. So one of the questions for me as a medical examiner is to determine whether there are any signs of hypothermia in addition to what I had already observed, which was the blunt impact injuries. And the combination of the gastric, the stomach, and the pancreatic hemorrhages strongly suggested, given the circumstances and how the body was found, that hypothermia did in fact play a role in his death.
What about a car? Did a car play a role in his death? Did a car play any role in his death? Because the only injury that you've told me about, aside from the arm injuries, right? And now we learn that there is also a mark or laceration or abrasion, whichever one she called it, on the inside of the arm, the upper arm. The only other injury to anything below the waist, let's say, is a tiny right knee abrasion. And she's you can see she's really thinking about what she wants to say, unlike the doctor that preceded her, who was her testimony flowed. She didn't really have to think about it. It's like, this is what I did, and it just came to her naturally. This witness seemed to be very careful and is thinking before she's speaking. Yes, she is carefully choosing her words, but that also makes me think she is doing that for a reason. Let me know what you think. That's just my read on it.
Now,
Yes, Barbie stories. This is the one Proctor called a whack job.
This first as precursor. But when you use the term hypothermia, what do you understand? What does hypothermia mean from a medical diagnostic?
Right, hypothermia is a term used to describe low body temperature. By definition, 35 degrees centigrade or below. And there are levels of hypothermia, from mild hypothermia to severe hypothermia. It just basically means the body is losing heat faster than it can generate it.
And typically, what would be the sort of core body temperature that would determine someone is hypothermic versus not?
We're usually at 98 degrees or 37 degrees centigrade. So anything higher than that is considered a fever or hyperthermia. Anything lower than 35 degrees centigrade or 95 degrees Fahrenheit is considered hypothermia.
Lower than 95 degrees Fahrenheit?
If you could explain to the jury sort of a little bit about the type of diagnosis that is involved in hypothermia, and sort of what other sort of types of information you would be looking at in order to make that diagnosis.
Hypothermia is a difficult diagnosis to make, and sometimes it's a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning that all other possible causes of death have been ruled out and you're left with hypothermia. So a body that is found in the snow or in a cold environment and has a core body temperature of 85 degrees and is unresponsive or asystolic, meaning that there is no heart activity, could be a hypothermic death, or it could not be a hypothermic death. And it's up to us to determine by doing the autopsy what other factors are at play. So the example I like to give is a person with severe coronary artery disease goes out to shovel their driveway, suffers a heart attack, and drops to the ground and is dead within seconds. And no one discovers their body for a few hours during the storm. When they're found, they're asystolic, their core body temperature is 80 degrees. But the autopsy shows another reason for their death. It shows a massive heart attack, which is what killed them. They just happened to be outside after they died and they lost heat and their body temperature dropped. Doesn't mean they died from hypothermia. However, if you take a person, an elderly person, or any person, an intoxicated person, a person who is intoxicated with drugs, that goes out into bad weather, gets confused, loses their direction, isn't able to get to shelter, and they die. Their body temperature starts to drop. They get more disoriented. They get more confused. Their organ systems start to shut down, and eventually they die from hypothermia. So that person will also be found in the snow with a core body temperature of 80, 85 degrees. But when we do the autopsy, if we see those gastric hemorrhages, if we see that bleeding in the stomach, if we see the bleeding in the pancreas, if we look at their toxicology and we see that they were intoxicated with multiple substances, then we can
Was he intoxicated with multiple substances? Let's talk about the toxicology.
determine, or we can opine that the cause of death was at least partly due to the hypothermia, because they were still alive when they started losing heat, as opposed to someone who had the heart attack and was already dead when they started losing heat from the body.
Oh. How long to
Doctor,
die
when
in
coming
cold?
to-
How long to die in cold? He was still alive. He could have been saved. You won't get hypothermic if you're already deceased. Right? Is that what she just said?
Your opinion in relation to the cause of death of Mr. O'Keefe. In addition to your autopsy, your internal, your external examination, what, if any, other materials were you provided, and what, if any, other materials did you review in relation to?
I was provided with a police report, an investigative report. I was provided with some of his prior medical records. I was provided with records from the hospital.
Wait, she was provided with a police report? Hold on.
Death of Mr. O'Keefe. Your opinion. Doctor, when coming to your opinion in relation to the cause of death of Mr. O'Keefe, in addition to your autopsy, your internal, your external examination, what, if any, other materials were you provided, and what, if any, other materials did you review in relation to?
I was provided with a police report, an investigative report. I was provided with
An investigative report that said what? Which one? There's, as far as I know, there's no motor vehicle accident report in this case. So what police and investigative report were you provided with? What did it say? Is it the one where everyone says that guy never came in the house? Karen Reed said, I hit him, and you still did not determine that it was a motor vehicle accident? What police and investigative report was she provided with? The one from Canton PD? Remember, she did not do this autopsy for 2 days. Officer O'Keefe was murdered on January 29th. She did not start the autopsy until 2 days later, which is the 31st. What was she provided with? Because remember, Trooper Proctor did not even type up his reports until way later. The Canton PD report, because that's really the only one that was done by then. Or did Proctor keep providing her with more and more information as the months went by? Because in his text messages to his buddies, who were calling him basically a loser for not being able to get her to change the manner of death from undetermined to homicide, did they keep providing her with more information so that they could try and get her to change her findings based on their stellar police investigation? I have questions.
some of his prior medical records. I was provided with records from the hospital where he was first taken by emergency medical personnel. And during the course of the autopsy, of course, I didn't mention this. We also, during the autopsy, collect fluids from the body that are sent to the lab for toxicologic analysis. And after a few weeks after the autopsy, we get a report from the toxicology lab. And in this case, I looked at the toxicology report. as I mentioned, all the information from the investigators, the autopsy findings, the neuropathology findings, and came to a conclusion as to the cause.
Now, as part of the,
What prior medical records of his would she need to look at, and why? That's very curious to me as well. Did he have any chronic medical conditions? What prior medical records? She said the emergency room record, the police report and investigative reports, when the toxicology came back a couple of weeks later, and prior medical records. Separate and apart from the emergency room record. That's interesting to me. His toxicology reports, they did toxicology on him. And she said before, when she was giving her example, if there was multiple substances in someone's body.
documentation that you received from the investigators, did that include photographs of the scene as well?
Yes, it did. Some photographs.
Photographs of the scene? Why are they giving her photographs of the scene? There's no tire tracks in the snow. What photographs of the scene? A couple of blood drops in the snow that you never tested? A picture of 6 red Solo cups in a Stop and Shop bag? Pictures of taillight that you found on the lawn? What crime scene photos? You don't have a picture of his body on the lawn. You've got none. Did you send her the video of the leaf blower? Pictures of the car. Yeah, did you send a picture of the car? Yeah, what photos? Yeah, let's hear it.
Turning back to the toxicological findings that you received, what, if any, indication did those findings have, or did they indicate in regard to blood alcohol concentration with regard to Mr. O'Keefe?
Mr. O'Keefe had alcohol in his system, and I do believe, I don't have the toxicology in front of me.
Well, we need to hear it.
In his blood at the time of autopsy, the level was 0.21
What?
grams per deciliter.
0.21. That's twice. That's
Now,
almost 3 times the legal
contained
limit.
within those toxic
And that's at the time of autopsy. That's 2 days later. I need more. His blood alcohol content is 0.21. 0.08 is the legal limit for drunk driving. It's nearly 3 times. 2 days later. Does it increase as time goes by if a person is deceased? Okay. That's huge. It's not a crime. No, it's not a crime. Absolutely not. But did that play a role in his death? Right? Did that play a role in his death with regard to belligerence, wanting to fight? She dropped him off there, her getting angry, why she was so mad about him not going home with her, why she was so mad that he wasn't responding to her, right? So no, it's not a crime, but it's a factor. The alcohol would greatly reduce the amount of time you can survive in the snow. That's not going to be a whole blood number. Can't be. Let's see what she's got to say.
toxicology findings. There's also something listed as a vitreous humor. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what that is, where that sample is taken from, and why it is?
Yeah, that sample, the vitreous humor, is taken from the back chamber of the eye. It's one of the routine samples that we take in addition to blood from the body and urine. And it's, again, used to look for the presence of different drugs. In cases of alcohol intoxication, sometimes we will get a value for the vitreous, and sometimes that value might not be exactly the same as the value that we get for the blood. It gives us an idea of where in the curve of alcohol metabolism, the individual is.
And so based on sort of the disparity between the vitreous humor level and the, I'm sorry, I may not have asked, what was the level in the vitreous humor?
I believe it was higher.
Higher?
point.
LA
Sorry,
woman,
just have to find
LA
it.
woman says, keep in mind, they don't do whole blood. They only do serum, right? But they're trying to use Karen's serum against her.
I think it was 0.26. I'm sorry, I can't find it in these
0.26. You
notes.
can't use it again. You can't use blood alcohol content as a shield on a sword. You can't say, well, because Karen's serum level in the hospital for her ETOH level was 0.08 at the time they drew her blood at 9 a.m. We're going to extrapolate that back to the time when the garbage in information came and said this is when her last drink was, and we're going to extrapolate her back to somewhere between 0.13 and 0.29 at 12:45 a.m. when they first said she hit and intentionally killed John O'Keefe. And then in this instance say, but his wasn't really 0.21 or 0.26 because it was not whole blood, it was only serum. See what I'm saying? But that's a great point. She's saying the vitreous humor level was 0.26. So which one's more
I don't know
accurate?
if you have the,
Chairman, may I approach?
yes.
Which one is more accurate, my medically educated friends?
Oh, yeah, copy of the toxicology.
Yes. It was 0.28.
0.28. It's
Now,
even
Doctor,
more.
with respect to the disparity between what was contained as the BAC and the vitreous humor versus the other number from his blood, what, if anything, does that indicate to you as far, or what, if anything, do you take from it?
That suggests that the level in Mr. O'Keefe's blood had been higher than 0.21, and that's reflected by the 0.28 that was in the vitreous. The vitreous metabolism of alcohol lags. It's a little slower, lags behind that of the blood and the circulation. The alcohol is metabolized in the liver, but the fact that it is higher in the vitreous suggests that the level in the blood was also higher at some point prior.
Higher than
So
0.28?
at some point, whenever Mr. O'Keefe died, his level of alcohol was on the decrease. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Now, with respect to, you mentioned that you had reviewed the EMS reports for Mr. O'Keefe as well as his medical records from Good Samaritan. Is that correct?
Correct.
And if you could just briefly for the jury explain your understanding as far as some of the terms within those medical records. Are you familiar with your review of Mr. O'Keefe's medical records that he was labeled as being in cardiac arrest?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that is?
Yes, he was labeled as asystolic or in asystole, which is basically a flat line. So if you attach leads to the body, there is no electrical activity coming from the heart.
Now, with respect to Mr. O'Keefe, as far as certain vital signs were taken in the course of his treatment at the Good Samaritan, is that correct?
Yes.
Including a core temperature, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what that core temperature was?
Yes. It was noted as 80.1.
And that was a temperature reading that was taken at 7:19 a.m., is that correct?
It was taken.
This is the Commonwealth, I mean.
Actually,
who did
this
the autopsy.
temperature reading in the records that I'm looking at was taken at 6:57 a.m.
And with respect to that 80.1 degree temperature, that's in Fahrenheit, is that correct?
Yes.
And so what, if any, relationship does that have, or what, if any, relationship does that have to your hypothermic diagnosis?
Well, that is the temperature. At this point, Mr. O'Keefe is asystolic, meaning he has no cardiac activity. That is the temperature of his body at the time that he was taken to, that he was examined by EMS and taken to the hospital. So it is a very hypothermic temperature. It is well below the 95 degrees, which we consider hypothermia.
Now, I believe you alluded to it earlier in your testimony, but with respect to hypothermia, what are some of the manifestations of that type of onset as it progresses?
Well, the first evidence of hypothermia, which we have no problem in this room, is shivering. When someone starts to get cold, they start to shiver to conserve heat. But then as the body loses more and more heat, there are neurologic consequences. People can get confused. We see this in the elderly all the time. They can get disoriented. And eventually at very low temperatures, below 90 degrees, everything ceases to function. The heart stops.
And would physical weakness or lack of strength be one of those manifestations as well?
Yes.
And how many different sort of stages of hypothermia are there from the beginning of or onset of progression to the end?
There is mild hypothermia to extreme severe hypothermia.
If I may have a moment, John.
Yes.
Guess the room is hot.
Now, with regards, as far as the type of clothing that someone is wearing when they're outside in these types of conditions, what, if any, relationship would that have with regard to the quickness or the rapidity of the onset of hypothermia?
Clearly, the more layers someone has, the slower they will lose heat from their body. The fewer layers, the faster they can become hypothermic.
And what, if any, information did you have as far as how Mr. O'Keefe was dressed when he was found in the snow on the morning of the 29th?
The information that I was given stated that he was wearing a pair of jeans and a long sleeve shirt.
No puffy jackets? We
Now,
need some
with
puffy
respect,
jackets in the chat.
to,
We haven't had puffy jackets in a while. Let's put some puffy jackets in the chat. We have special emojis. You might want to join. Members get access to special emojis for
someone
this
as far as
trial.
that hypothermia onset and the rapidity of it, what, if any, relationship with the condition of the clothing? What I'm asking there is more sort of the dryness versus wet clothing. What, if any, relationship with that?
Well, again, wet clothing or wet conditions will speed up the rate at which the body loses heat.
Now, lastly, with regard to this
Hence the
area,
search, Haas long to die in cold. You picking up what she's laying down here?
Doctor, in regard to Mr. O'Keefe having sort of alcohol on board in his system.
Alcohol
At the
on
time,
board.
That hypothermia.
Oh, instead of the baby on board. Oh, my freeze game is on point today. Look at Paul O'Keefe. If you're listening to me without watching the video, he's got his fingers on the bridge of his nose and his eyes closed like he cannot believe this. And now I just forgot what I was going to say. It'll come to me.
Alcohol on board in his system.
Alcohol on board. Should we replace that baby on board sign with alcohol on board and put that on the back of your bumper? Like alcohol on board. Is that like we're going to start using like cute little slogans in the courtroom now when you're trying to talk about his level of intoxication? How much alcohol he had on board?
Lastly, with regard to this area, Doctor, in regard to Mr. O'Keefe having sort of alcohol on board in his system.
Alcohol on
At the
board.
time that hypothermia onset, what, if any, relationship does that have in respect to the onset of hypothermia and the rapidity of that?
Alcohol intoxication, it has been shown to inhibit some of the mechanisms that the body uses to maintain heat. So it's definitely a factor that is a negative factor when it comes to hypothermia.
So you can die in the cold faster if you're blind drunk. Right? Begs the question, if he was that drunk, closer to a 0.28 than a 0.21, How long would it take to die in the cold from hypothermia? Since it's a negative, you will die faster in the cold. How long would it take for your body temperature to go from 98.6 to 80.1, which was his core body temperature when they took it at the hospital at 7:19 a.m. He was not pronounced, I think, until about 7:50 a.m. And we've been told that is because the body needs to be warmed up before you can be pronounced, perhaps. Interesting. Alcohol on board is a common phrase in the ER. Maybe, but the jury's not. At least one of them may be in the medical field, but the rest of them aren't. And it just sounds to me a little bit callous to talk about a dead police officer like that, the victim in this case, as someone who had alcohol on board. I think it's flippant, and I don't like it. But Granderkey, I love your screen name. That's just my opinion.
May I approach?
Yes.
Paul O'Keefe. Ugh, it's tragic. And think about it. If he went in that house, they all knew how hammered he was. That's pretty hammered, 0.28, you guys.
Doctor, I'm showing you a single-page document. You could just review that, look up when you're finished.
Remember the 3 Kansas City Chiefs
Do you
Yes.
recognize that,
fans
Doctor?
I do.
that were found outside frozen in that dude's backyard because they were all watching the Kansas City Chiefs game, and then the 3 bodies were found frozen in the backyard? Wonder if they got a warrant to search that house. Did they?
It is a photocopy of the exam notes that I took at the time of autopsy.
Does that also contain a body diagram with relation to your notes as far as where you observed injuries on Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm
I mean-
on the seat to introduce him as the next exhibit.
No objection.
Thank you.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, if we could publish that for the jury at this time.
Okay.
Kevin Griffin, you can become hypothermic faster if you're submerged in cold water, which also washes away canine DNA.
Doctor, there should be somewhere before you on the desk over there, laser pointer. Coming, if you could, enlarge that just a bit, and if you could focus in towards the top and the head area. Now, Dr. Scordi-Bello, what's up on the screen? Is that what you have before you as the next exhibit?
Yes.
And on this, as far as the examination that you conducted, that also included certain measurements as far as height, weight, things like that, that you did with regard to Mr. O'Keefe's body, correct?
Correct.
And if you could, what did you record as your measurements for both the height and the weight of Mr. O'Keefe?
He was weighed by our staff as 216 pounds and measuring 73 inches, which is 6 feet 1 inch.
Now, doctor, if you could, using the laser pointer before you, direct the jury's attention to starting with the front or the facial area and then to the back of the head, but just with reference to the head area, directing their attention to what, if anything, you observed in the area of the head of Mr. O'Keefe.
In terms of injuries,
Yes.
you'd like me to point out the injuries? So as I mentioned, there were ecchymosis, that's another word for collection of blood under the upper eyelids. On Mr. O'Keefe, the ecchymosis on the right eyelid was also associated with a very small laceration. Then there was an abrasion on the left side of the nose. And then on the back of the head, there was a 3 centimeter laceration. So this is the right side. It would be towards, the back lower side on the right side of the head.
And that laceration on the black lower side, or right side of the head, is that in the same area that you observed what you described as sort of the originating skull fracture?
Yes, when the scalp was reflected, there was bleeding under the scalp in that particular area. And then when the skull was opened, that's the area that appeared fractured and appeared to have other fractures originating or radiating from it.
Ms. Gilman, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down just for the middle of the torso. And Dr. Scordi-Bello, if you could again use the laser pointer, just direct the jury's attention to what, if any, injuries you noted in this sort of middle torso or upper extremity portion of Mr.
So on the right upper extremity, and again, this is the back of the body. We have this collection of linear abrasions. I think the battery is dead. That measure.
Stop. Stop. Okay. Looking at this diagram, this is the right arm. Okay. See all the lacerations on the right arm, the dog bites that we surmise are dog bites. Look at the left arm. There's some on the left arm as well. Have we seen photographs of that arm? I don't believe we have. The judge told us we're going to see some photos from the autopsy. And if you look at the front of his arms, you can see, I mean, I don't think this is supposed to be like an elbow marking on this diagram. I think she made these markings right here on the inner portion of the left arm and the right arm. Another abrasion up here to the top of the right arm. What say you? We didn't know about any left arm. Look. Linear. She wasn't even asked about it. That is the elbow marking. Okay, so you think that is the elbow marking, but look on the back. That's the elbow marking too, or are those other abrasions? Because she says, it says abrasion right here. See this? I think that says abrasion. See don't break your TV and send me a bill, but if you can see my cursor right here, in between the two body diagrams, it says abrasion. I think that's what it says. All right, moving on.
Measured up to 7 centimeters and extended from the upper arm down to the middle of the forearm.
If I could interrupt you for 1 second, may I switch?
Thanks. This would be the abrasions.
Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you to scroll down for the lower extremities. And again, Dr. Scordi-Bello, if you could, again, using laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if any, injuries you observed on the lower extremities in regards to Mr.
The lower extremities didn't have a lot of injuries. There was a small abrasion on his right knee area on the side. And if you don't mind pushing the diagram just a little bit more up to see the hands, there were some contusions or some bruises on the dorsal aspects of the right hand and some very faint bruise on the left.
Like, I don't know, defensive wounds. If you tried to hit somebody back that was hitting you or punching you, I don't know. So he wasn't dragged underneath the car, doctor? Is that what you're saying? That little abrasion to the side of his knee wouldn't be from being dragged underneath the car, would it?
Thank you, Joe. And Ms. Gilman, you can take that down. Nora, may I approach again?
Yes.
Yeah, again, where are the socks? I want to know what happened to the socks.
Doctor, if I could show you what's a 2-page document, ask you to just review that a couple of minutes.
And do you recognize what that is?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
These are copies of diagrams that I used at the time of autopsy to document some of the injuries on the face and the skull.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'll multi seek to introduce in the minutes the next exhibit.
Any objection?
No objection.
Thank you.
Exhibit 644.
And Your Honor, may I return that to the witness?
Yes.
With the court's permission, if we could publish that for the jury.
Okay.
Ma'am, one moment, Your Honor.
Yep.
I want to know if he had a fractured nose. That would explain all the blood down the front of his shirt.
Okay, Dr. Scordi-Bello, do you recognize what's picked up on the screen? It's the next exhibit before you.
Yes.
And if you could, again, using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, you observed or noted of significance in these particular diagrams.
So the upper eyelids, the areas of the upper eyelids on both sides had ecchymosis or blood under them. On the right side, there was a very small laceration or a small tear associated with that. Both eyes had some swelling to them. And then on the nose, there were two abrasions, two scrapes. One was small at 0.5 centimeters. The other one was 1 centimeter, and it was linear. And I noted them right there.
But your autopsy report says these injuries don't seem to be consistent with a fight in more than one place. Okay.
Come in, if you could scroll down a bit. And again, from the bottom right diagram for you, Doctor, if you could, use the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to what, if any, injuries of significance you noted in that portion of the diagram.
This is the area where I noted the laceration to the scalp. I noted something called tissue bridging, which is a morphologic feature of a laceration. It's what makes it different from an incised wound or from a cut, because again, the skin is crushed, and now it's more irregular. The edges are more irregular. And then above that laceration, I noted that there was a scrape as well associated with it. So that was one injury.
Right. Why aren't the skull fractures noted?
Doctor, if I could
Thank you, Team
direct
Brittany.
to the next page of that exhibit before you. And Ms. Gilman, if you could, really sort of enlarge on the top left diagram.
Yes.
Now, Doctor, before we get into the diagram that's up on the screen, if I could ask just a bit more, if you could expound upon when you use the term ecchymosis, what exactly does that mean in specific reference to the area of the eyes?
Ecchymoses are a word that we use to describe bruising. Orbital ecchymosis or periorbital ecchymosis or supraorbital ecchymosis just refer to the location of the bleeding in relation to the eye. And when we see ecchymosis or bleeding around the eyes, one of the differential diagnoses, one of the etiologies is blunt trauma to the head, and specifically fractures to what is known as the base of the skull. And this, what you're seeing here, is the base of the skull.
So were there fractures to the base of the skull?
Doctor, if you could, using that diagram up on the screen, explain to the jury, when we asked first, as far as what, were you able to formulate an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to sort of how the injuries within the skull and the brain sort of interacted with each other? In particular, interacted also with the ecchymosis that you're describing in the orbital region.
So the injuries inside the skull, this is the base of the skull. This is, think of it as the tray where the brain would be sitting on top. The brain has been removed, and now we're looking at the bones. Right here is where I noted the skull, one of the skull fractures to be originating or starting with fractures. These are linear fractures that are extending or radiating from this one point of impact. This is known as the posterior fossa of the base. These two chambers are known as the middle cranial fossa, and this area is known as the anterior cranial fossa. As you look at this, the eyes would be sitting back here. So the eyes are actually very intimately associated with the anterior cranial fossa, which is very thin, and the bones are quite thin and friable.
Right. So fractures to both of his eye sockets, orbits, perhaps. All of these green magic marker lines are skull fractures. Look, right behind both his front eyes. Hello. And then there's a fracture extending from his left eye all the way back. Multiple skull fractures here, but they're not all connected. The way she explained it at first, I thought this basal skull fracture back here was going to radiate into multiple fractures, sort of like in a pattern, right? Like they're all connected. They're not. These appear to be, from my legal opinion, not medical, separate and distinct fractures from the fracture to the back of the skull, because they're not all connected like a spider web. Right? Numerous hits. Correct. Thank you. Okay.
So an impact to the back of the head is was in this case, because we do have a laceration and we do have an abrasion. So we know that the head impacted something blunt with enough force to break the skull and enough the anterior cranial fossa.
Or something blunt impacted the head, right? Not necessarily that the head impacted something blunt or something blunt impacted the head. She's choosing her words very carefully.
The middle cranial fossa and also the anterior cranial fossa, which is the front chambers of the base. When the anterior cranial fossa are fractured, as I mentioned, they are very thin bones. Blood can seep from this area into the soft tissues and manifest as hemorrhage or bleeding or a contusion or an ecchymosis around the eye when you look at the person face, when you look at their face. So it is a well-known fact that fractures to the base of the skull can present with orbital ecchymosis, and that particular manifestation has a name. It's called raccoon eye because it resembles, I guess, what raccoon eyes look like.
I guess.
Emergency room physicians are always very alerted to any hemorrhage and any bleeding around the eyes, because it could signify or it could mean that there's a much bigger injury inside the skull, and that is not just some bleeding around the eyes, that it actually is associated with a skull fracture.
Mm-hmm. Brain bleed.
So the ecchymosis itself, as far as the sort of drainage or seepage of blood, that's coming into, that's what causes the eyes to sort of swell up. Is that correct?
Correct.
And doctor, if I could ask you with reference to, if you could illustrate with the laser pointer on the diagram up on the screen, as far as the subarachnoid hemorrhage, subdural hematoma, as far as the bleeding within the brain, what, if any, impact that has on the skull as far as the fractures are concerned, or this building up of pressure itself?
Subarachnoid hemorrhage is a thin layer of hemorrhage on top of the brain, directly on top of the brain under the leptomeninges. The main effect, or I guess one of the effects that subarachnoid hemorrhage has, is that it is very irritating to the brain and can lead to seizures. Subdural hemorrhage is hemorrhage that is due to veins in the dura, that very tough protective cover on top of the brain, that are broken and leak blood into the space between the dura and the brain. That kind of injury, given enough time, you can have accumulation of the blood, and it can cause significant shift into the brain. That's not something that we had here. Here we had some subdural hemorrhage, but not enough that it was what we call space occupying, but it was present. So it was due to bridging veins in the dura being injured from the trauma, from the fractures. And in terms of the effect that all these injuries have, the subdural and the subarachnoid and the skull fractures, anytime the brain is injured, it responds by swelling. And the skull is a closed space without the ability to expand, unlike the skin, where you can have a bruise or a significant amount of blood accumulate under the skin. In the skull, once the brain starts to react to the injury and it starts to swell, there's nowhere to go except for down. And that's the foramen magnum. That is the area where the brainstem and the spinal cord will run out. You know, spinal cord connects, obviously, the brain to the rest of the body. And this is one of the few spaces that the brain can try and squeeze into because it has nowhere else to go. So herniation, brain swelling and herniation are a general response that the brain has to any sort of trauma.
Correct. It could have relieved the pressure to the brain and he could have survived. You are correct, Granarchy. You are correct. That's why they drill a hole in the skull to relieve the pressure, right? And allow the fluid to drain.
We can have the lights back on. May I approach Sister Retreat?
Yes.
Now, Doctor, with respect to the head injury, specifically the fracture, what, if any, opinion can you give or can you say in regard to the type of force or amount of force necessary to cause the fracture to the skull that you observed with regard to Mr. O'Keefe?
I can't really give you a number. I'm not a physicist. I can tell you that the skull is a pretty thick bone. It takes considerable amount of force to fracture the skull. So that was a pretty considerable impact.
Pretty considerable impact, not 24 miles an hour. Vehicle hitting a 6'1", 216 pound male. I submit to you, if anybody in the chat's ever been hit as a pedestrian at around 20 miles an hour, did you walk away? Did you walk away without any leg injuries or torso injuries or hip injuries?
Now, with respect to the injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's head and the onset of hypothermia, what, if any, opinion do you have with regard to the timing of those respective to each other?
Well, I do believe the injuries, the blunt impact injuries, were sustained first. These are not injuries that are immediately lethal. This is not something that would cause death in seconds. And therefore, Mr. Keefe may have been incapacitated by the injuries or
By the blows to his head?
knocked out, if you will.
Knocked out?
And was not able to get himself into a warmer environment, and therefore hypothermia set in, given the environmental conditions and given the clothing on the body, or the lack of clothing, I should say. No big jacket or anything like that.
No puffy jacket. Who told you he had no jacket on? Who told you that? Because Timothy Nuttall swears he had a puffy jacket on. In fact, he said it was hard to get that puffy jacket off because we can't cut them with the trauma shears because they make a mess. And his limbs were stiff. It was hard to get that puffy jacket off. The blunt injuries were first. Right, not the arm lacerations. That's interesting. Would have incapacitated him. If he was incapacitated, fell on the ground, perhaps unconscious, and then perhaps an animal was involved. That would make sense with regard to the bite patterns that Dr. Marie Russell is going to talk about.
Now, when you say something as far as some type of injury being immediately lethal, can you give an example of that?
The one that forensic pathologists like to use is a gunshot wound to the head that goes from one side to the other, disrupting the neural systems of the brain and causing the person to immediately drop and die within seconds or milliseconds. This is not that kind of injury. This is an injury that took a little bit of time to develop, as is manifested by the fact that we have some bleeding, which means that the heart is still pumping and blood is still coming out of the vessels.
And so I guess to that point, as far as what was it from your examination and your findings and your review of sort of the overall materials that leads you to believe that the head injuries happened prior to hypothermia setting in?
Again, the findings of hypothermia, the blunt impact injuries, if someone is, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that someone becomes hypothermic and then falls as a result. But the hypothermia would continue along with the brain injuries that took some time to develop. So in my opinion, I believe the impact, the injury to the head came first. Mr. Keefe was most likely incapacitated or unable to move into a warmer environment, and then the hypothermia set in.
Or he was dragged out to a
If
colder
you can,
environment.
What, if anything, can you say as to the sort of, in contrast to sort of the bullet to the head or the instantaneous death?
The
what, if
bullet to the
anything,
head. Why are we talking about bullets to the head, Lally? Don't confuse the issue.
Can you say as to the time that this would take to manifest itself as far as the injury to the head and the hypothermic state?
Again, I can't give you specifics. I would say this was definitely in the matter of minutes, many minutes, or hours.
Minutes or hours. Agreed. Magnolia Gypsy, she has not even come close to convincing me Officer John O'Keefe was not beat to death.
I may have a moment, John.
He laid there alive for how long? We don't know.
Photographs. Now, Doctor, you had mentioned that at some point you had reviewed some photographs from the scene where Mr. O'Keefe's body was recovered. Is that correct?
Yes, I was shown some photographs.
Oh, great.
And from the photographs that you were shown, what, if anything, of significance did you observe or lack thereof in the area where Mr. O'Keefe's body was recovered?
Well, based on those photographs, limited number of photographs that I saw and I was shown, there didn't appear to be a lot of disruption around the area where I was told that Mr. O'Keefe's body was found.
Objection. She's not a crime scene investigator. A lot of disruption in the area where she was told his body was found? What do you mean disruption? Blood?
And that lack of sort of disruption in the snow around where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found, what, if any, significance would that have to you as far as from a diagnostic perspective?
Well, it suggests that he really didn't travel a very long distance once the injury was inflicted.
Oh, you didn't see any
And as
drag
far as
marks or anything?
anything related to footprints, drag marks, anything like that, did you observe anything like that in that area?
On the pictures that I saw, no.
I want to see the pictures that she saw. Can we see the pictures?
Now, from your extent of your examination of Mr. O'Keefe's body, what, if anything, that you observe that would indicate any sort of altercation or a fight or anything like that Mr. O'Keefe was in?
I didn't see any major signs of what I would call a significant altercation.
A significant altercation. Stop. The Leaf Blower Society has commenced outside my window. Their weekly meeting. Who knows how many are out there, but it sounds like a lot. Now she's going to say this did not seem to her to be caused by a significant altercation. Okay. I can't wait to hear this testimony. Okay. She's going to look right at the jury when she says it too. Okay. Here we go.
Now, from your extent of your examination of Mr. O'Keefe's body, what, if anything, that you observe that would indicate any sort of altercation or a fight or anything like that Mr. O'Keefe was in?
I didn't see any major signs of what I would call a significant altercation.
Really? Like multiple skull
And
fractures?
With regard to that, as far as signs, what are some of the signs and what would you be expecting to see and what was lacking as far as your observations of Mr. O'Keefe?
I looked at Mr. O'Keefe's hands. As you saw on the diagrams, I did document that there were some contusions on the dorsal aspect, very vague and faint contusion on the left, and contusion on the right hand. That particular contusion has a central little pinpoint mark that may suggest that it was due to attempts to get IV access on his hand. That's very common.
Except didn't they put IV into his shin? Didn't we learn that at the same? Notice her minimizing language. Faint marks, little prick, little faint. No major signs of an altercation or fight, right? Minimizing language here.
Place, but I didn't see any bruising on Mr. O'Keefe's knuckles. His nails were intact. I didn't see any breaks on his nails, and I
And his blood alcohol content was 0.28.
didn't see any fractures or feel any fractures on any of his hands.
You didn't see or feel fracture? Did you x-ray his hands? Were there any x-rays taken?
Now, with respect to the diagrams that were up on the screen before, as well as your observations from internal examination, you observed some fractures to Mr. O'Keefe's ribs, is that correct?
Yes, he did have some
Yeah, from
fractures,
CPR.
I believe, to the 4th and 5th ribs near the sternum. It's a very common location for CPR-associated fractures.
And so I believe you just alluded to it right there, but as far as any fractures to Mr. O'Keefe's ribs, what, if any, opinion do you have as to the origination or causality of those rib fractures?
As I mentioned, those are very consistent with the resuscitation. We see those quite often. Given the history that I was provided that extensive resuscitation was attempted, I documented those as most likely due to resuscitation.
So not from Alexis.
Now, doctor, with regard to the, just by way of contrast, you talked a bit about the significant impact or the thickness of the skull. How does that relate to the area of the ribs that you're talking about as far as can be fractured in resuscitative efforts?
Well, I don't understand the question.
Let me rephrase it. What is the difference sort of between the thickness of the bone in the skull versus the thickness of the bone in the ribs?
The skull in general is a thicker bone. It requires more force.
Mhm.
Now, doctor, if I could, are you familiar with a medical term known as vasodilation?
Yes.
And can you explain what that term is and how it relates to Mr. O'Keefe's condition?
I can explain what the term is. Vasodilation means opening up. Vaso refers to blood vessels. So vasodilation is the opening up of blood vessels to bring more blood to the extremities or any part of the body.
And again, that's a bit of an unfair question as far as the relations. But so how does that manifest itself as far as someone who's in colder conditions or has that sort of onset of hypothermia? What, if any, relation does the vasodilation have to that?
Well, you can see vasodilation. You can see vasoconstriction and vasodilation in hypothermia. Initially, the blood vessels will constrict in an attempt to reduce blood flow to the extremities so there's no heat loss. Anyone who has Raynaud's knows what that feels like. Then ultimately the blood vessels will dilate, bringing more blood to the extremities. Again, the normal regulatory mechanisms that the brain has to maintain our body temperature are disrupted when you get into those very low temperatures. And therefore, sometimes in hypothermia, you can see very, very red extremities due to vasodilation.
And with regard to the redness due to vasodilation, is there also a whiteness, sort of discoloration to the extremities that can be observed in hypothermic patients as well?
That's been described as well, yes.
Now, with reference to when you make your observations of Mr. O'Keefe, why is it that, well, let me ask you this. You didn't see any signs of vasodilation or white fingertips or anything like that. Is that correct?
Correct. I rarely see signs of vasodilation, especially if someone has died in the hospital.
And can you explain to the jury sort of why that is?
So for two reasons. In this particular reason, Mr. O'Keefe was taken to the hospital and attempts were made at rewarming the body. So he was given warm intravenous fluids and attempts were made to bring the body temperature up with the hope that the heart would start working once that happened. Also, I did not physically see the body until Monday morning. And therefore, I can't really comment on vasodilation or any effects that hypothermia may or may not have had acutely on the body, because I'm seeing the body hours after death, and already the body has been transferred from the scene to the hospital, stored at the hospital, and then transferred from the hospital to our facility. So there's just too much time between when the body was discovered to when I looked at the body to make any reasonable comments on whether there was vasodilation or not.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
See that look of despair? She's like, sigh. Give me some sigh emojis in the chat, friends. Sigh emojis. That was quite a sigh. I want to see the crime scene photos that she was shown. And I want to know what police report she was shown or what investigative report she was shown. I want to know, I want to see all the materials that she looked at in preparation for her autopsy report and her testimony today. I want to see it all. Thank you. I hope someone's listening. Maybe this is it. Maybe these are the photos we've been waiting for. All right, we've got 5,617, only
I'm
2,700
actually going
likes.
to see counsel at sidebar for a minute, please.
So, sidebar. Let's hit the like button. Let's all hit the like button. It helps push the stream out. Just because you like this morning's stream doesn't mean that you don't have to like this afternoon's stream, because it doesn't carry over. So, Paul O'Keefe not looking happy again. Don't know who that is sitting behind him.
area. And having looked at the photographs, it makes sense that we break for today and we'll start.
Oh,
fresh
end of
with
day.
tomorrow rather than showing these two folks now. So, thank you. So we are going to end for today. We are on track. Maybe we are definitely on track for finishing this case next week, partly because of staying all day tomorrow and some of the work we did today and on Tuesday when you all were here. So please follow the
Tuesday, what's gonna happen on
instructions. Do not
Tuesday?
Discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into the case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about the case, please disregard it. Let us know. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Sure, leaving your notebooks on your chairs, take all your belongings, all rise.
Leave your notebooks on your chairs. Is that it? Does she talk to the attorneys at all? Does
Me
she-
for anything now? Does anybody, so we're still in session? Does anybody need me for anything now?
If we could just approach briefly, just
Okay.
regarding scheduling, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Scheduling, okay. See if she'll say anything. Okay, we're on real time. Yay, us. What did she say about Tuesday? I couldn't hear. Thanks, Ray Woodward, for your super chat. Says, thank you, me, for your great coverage, the hardworking mods. You really capture the outrage I feel and help me cope with the miscarriage happening in front of my eyes. I feel the same way. The same way when it shows. Crypto tax lawyer, thanks for the 5. Do we know who defendant's calling as a medical expert accounter? Yeah, Dr. Frank Sheridan. He's a medical examiner in California.
All rise for the court, please.
All right, and that's a wrap on the day, folks. That's a wrap on the day in the courtroom of Justice Beverly Cannoni in the Norfolk Superior Court. BLT, thanks for the 5. I really appreciated both your legal and personal opinion on Baker's channel last night. Thanks. If you guys didn't see it, go check it out. Broken Baker had me and Runkle and Mike Crawford from Young Jerks and Brandy Churchwell and Valhalla, and we did a 6-panel stream last night on Karen Reed, and it was great. I thought it was great. Thank you. You're a light who always outshines the dark shadows. Thank you. We work very hard here to make this a kind place, I would say. Intolerant, thank you. Outside dead at 18 degrees for 6 hours, he'd be like a block of ice. Didn't someone say John O'Keefe was in the house? Well, Allie McCabe kind of slipped and said, Colin wasn't out the house when John O'Keefe got there. A lot of people picked up on that, but so far she's the only one. 2:30, thanks for the 5. If this is all they get, this need to be dismissed after the prosecution rests. There's literally no evidence of a murder, no mic drop moments to see. No. But we know this judge, and she's going to send it to a jury. I firmly believe she's not going to dismiss it. Lauren Elizabeth, thank you for the 20. Thank you, Melanie, for all you do for what's right in the system. Women love supporting women. Women supporting women is everything. Thank you so much. Watching from the bushes every day at work. Love you, your community and mods. You rock. Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for your very generous 20. Margaret, thank you for your super chat. Higgins had a snowplow on the front of his Jeep that would fracture a skull and cause abrasions. Just saying. Misty Jenkins, thanks for the 10. Do you think the dog could have attacked him because he's a stranger? He hit his head on something that explains the Google search and why they got rid of the dog. Sure. Absolutely. Maybe he went in the backyard to take a leak, right? Maybe the dog was out there already because Brian Albert said he let the dog out. Maybe something happened. Dog might have attacked him. He might have fallen, hit his head on the concrete, but that doesn't explain why there would be a cover up of an accident. Or maybe it does, right? I don't think, whatever happened, I don't think Karen Reed's car struck John O'Keefe. And I don't think John O'Keefe was struck by Karen Reed's car. And that is what the FBI hired experts, the accident reconstructionists that we heard from, who both have very good hair, by the way, are going to testify to. And they were hired by the FBI in the federal investigation, not the defense. It's just what they're going to say. I mean, you heard this witness. There's no injuries from a car to the torso or lower body. None. Just me. To be honest, I think he could have survived, but if he did, he would tell what happened just saying yes. That's what a lot of people think as well, just me. Thanks for chiming in with the super chat. The Good Witch, thanks for the 10. Baseball bat to the back of the head, laceration, forces the brain forward and to the left. Think concussion, causing battle sign, raccoon eyes, says this Boston RN. But would that separate and distinct skull fracture from the blunt force trauma to the back of the head cause separate and distinct orbital fractures? That's my question. Because from her diagram with her green highlighter or Sharpie or whatever she used, they look like separate and distinct fractures to both behind both eyes. So I don't know. Seems to me like if you were struck in the back of the head with something, that skull fracture would radiate, right? And those would not be separate and distinct fractures. But I'm not a doctor. That's why I want a doctor to answer that question. Wanda Life, thank you. How were photos taken of the body prior to medics and Karen getting there? There weren't. She said no footprints or drag marks in the pictures she saw. In my opinion, that's impossible. Did she say that? There were no pictures that we have seen of the body in the snow. I mean, you guys correct me if I'm wrong. I know you will. But we have not seen, I'll put the chat back up over here so I can look at it. I have not seen any. Thanks, Danielle, for becoming a new member. Thanks, Vanny Annie, for your very generous 20. In your experience, is it common for lawyers to draw out testimony when the report doesn't match the prosecution's or defense's case? You mean to sort of like obfuscate from what the report says and talk about some extraneous issues? Like he talked a lot about hypothermia. And she said that clearly the blunt force trauma to the head was caused first before the hypothermia set in. And hypothermia wouldn't set in if he was already deceased when he was outside. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of lawyers that'll run the clock till the end of the day. Yeah, I've seen it both ways. Some lawyers are very concise. They're very clear with their strategy. Lally doesn't seem to have a strategy, except throwing spaghetti. So yeah, I've seen it both ways. Thanks, Danielle, for your super sticker. And Danielle for your other super sticker. ATV, AT1, CVB says, not me, but my son was hit at about 30 miles an hour when he was 17, flipped over the car, head broke, rear window, 3 broken vertebrae, several ribs, right knee needed total reconstruction. See? That's where the vehicle first came in contact with him, was at the knee, caused him to flip over the car. I'm so sorry that happened to him and to you as a mom. That has got to be the scariest thing in the world. Or dad. I can't see your picture. There's nothing worse than your child being in a severe accident like that. And my heart goes out to you, and I hope he's doing well. I hope he's doing well now. I mean, to be fair, John didn't really, was La Misa Filipino Food Club. I mean, to be fair, John didn't really want to hang out with Karen. They were fighting. He was ignoring her. He needed a ride so he could drink more and keep drinking, not shaming, but alcohol was first. And that leads to this other comment that I started from earlier. I don't think his alcohol is relevant beyond placing blame on him. I disagree, Rachel Ann. I disagree because the alcohol level contributed to him dying faster from hypothermia. And that's what the doctor testified to. So I do think it's very relevant here for a lot of reasons. In addition to why she may have been so angry with him that he wasn't responding. In addition to how fast he would die of hypothermia, or how long to die in the cold. I think it plays into the Google search that Jen McCabe's phone did or didn't make at 2:27 a.m. I think it plays into a lot of things. Llama FJ, something's just seeming off with her. I can't figure it out. This reminds me of, in the playlist, if you guys don't know this song, tell me if you know it. 5 Finger Death Punch, a little bit off. I'm a little bit off today. I'm a little bit off today. You got to listen to it. Don't listen to it with your kids in the car because there's some cursey words in it. But it's a great song. It's a rockin' tune. A little bit off. 5 Finger Death Punch. It's in the playlist, which is pinned to the chat. Nina, thank you, Mel. You're a lawyer. What is your theory of the FBI investigation and their goal? They're helping the defense, but why? We don't know who the target is of their investigation We don't know whether they were investigating something else that runs much deeper than this case, and they stumbled across some perhaps misdeeds in this investigation. We don't know if they had wiretaps going and this came up as a collateral issue and they stumbled across some text messages. Why are they helping the defense? Because they said when they had a conference call with both attorneys in this case, we are releasing to you the federal documents. We're going to go through the TUI process. We're going to jump through the hoops and the things and the stuff that we got to jump through to give you all of our investigative materials, because Josh Levy, the acting U.S. attorney for Massachusetts, said in good conscience, I cannot allow this case to go to trial. We don't know what they're investigating or whom, but we do know that that's what they did. And I have a whole in the playlist. It's the stream is called something like Feds released 374 pages of documents to both sides. Check it out. Thanks, Vicky, for your Cash App. Says great insight on this trial. Thank you so very much. So we are going to have a full day of court tomorrow. We were supposed to have a half day until 12, but now she's decided to go until 4. Thank you, HCB, for buying me a matcha latte, and Sharon for buying me 5 matcha lattes. Says that I'm a rock star, loves a lot watching me and listening to my commentary. Great group chat as well. We have the best chat. I think we do. I think we have the best chat. I'm not afraid to say it. Neither are you. You guys know it. You're here. You're here every day. Thanks, Danielle DeMeo, for your super sticker. For some reason, it's not going into the special column. Missed time of death. He was pronounced around 7:50 a.m. All right, you guys, stay safe. I will see you in the morning. Make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell so you get all notifications when I go live. I had prepared an entire time of death. TOD is time of death. I had prepared an entire stream on Justin Timberlake's arrest in the Hamptons. If I can throw it together and get my act together by this evening, if you're interested in seeing something like that, let me know. Otherwise, I may just record it and put it out. But there's a whole lot of tea on the Justin Timberlake arrest for Dewey out in the Hamptons here on Long Island, outside Sag Harbor, outside the American Hotel. And it's interesting stuff. I have all the court documents. We could go over that if anybody's interested. A lot of people emailed me about that. So I'm here for it. I will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, around at 8:45 a.m. So make sure you hit the bell. Make sure you thank my moderators for being the amazing people that they are and for hanging in there for so many hours with us today. And as I always say, my friends, to my cupcakes, my replay members, channel members, replay viewers, hit the like button, please. Helps the algorithm. And remember, be cool, be kind, be classy. It is not hard. I promise you, it is so not hard. Your life will be so much better. Peace. See you in the morning.